Bonsoir, bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Waouh, il y a du monde. Nous sommes très très heureux de vous accueillir ce soir pour cette masterclass.
So we're thrilled to have you here this evening for this masterclass. So welcome to our partner Jeux Vidéo Magazine, Cité, des sciences et de l'industrie, and Orange. And it's a great thrill to receive Harvey Smith, to welcome Harvey Smith tonight. Before he found his way into video games, he took a long time. He was in the US Air Force for 6 years, and it was only went back to Austin, Texas, that he went to Origin Systems.
Wing
Commander, System Shock, Ultima 8, and he met the legendary creators, Warren Spector and others, and this led to the lead design on Deus Ex. He had his own company, Midway Games, Midway Austin, and he was co-director creator for Dishonored, after he joined Arcane Studios in 2008, and he worked on Dishonored in 2012. And he now works in Arcane Lyon. So 22 years working in video games. He's talking about his vision of game design on gameplay emergence to creating as much freedom as possible for the player. And at least I hope we're going to have a great evening together. Off we go.
Harvey Smith?
Yes, sir.
Mesdames et messieurs, je vous prie d'accueillir Harvey Smith.
Ladies and gentlemen, Harvey Smith. I know he's not here, he's gone.
Allez, Harvey. Bonsoir, Harvey.
Good evening, Harvey. Welcome.
Harvey, est-ce que tu parles
So,
français?
Harvey, can you speak French?
Harvey, est-ce que tu parles français?
Can you speak French, Harvey?
Let me plug in my babel fish.
Ah.
Okay.
Well,
Harvey travaille depuis 2 ans en France.
he's been living in France, working in France for the past couple of years. We're going to be talking about your French-speaking problems later on. So first of all, welcome to the masterclass. Honestly, it's rare to see as many people here for this event, so it's great. So thank you, Harvey. You know the way the masterclasses work. Each masterclass starts at the beginning.
L'enfance, la jeunesse, on va parler donc de tes premiers pas.
Let's talk about your first steps
Et de ton enfance, c'est
and
toi,
your
là.
childhood. This
Tu es
is
né à
you.
Freeport.
You're born in Freeport, Texas.
Comment se passe ton enfance?
So what was it like being a kid? What was the young Harvey like?
Well, this is wow. This is a really old photo. Man, you know, Freeport, Texas is a town based around chemical refinement, Dow Chemical and Monsanto and other such companies that are currently destroying the world are centered there. And so the city is mostly built around people who work in chemical plants and their families. And this picture is obviously from the 1960s. So it's a long time ago, and it was a very different time. I mean, if you think about how, I mean, anybody who's, the more years go by, the more you realize, wow, the world does change, actually. And parenting is different now, and the work I do is different now than the work that my family did, so it's, I left all of that behind. I never thought I would live there for very long. As soon as I could, I left, and I've lived in Germany, I've lived in California, I've lived in France, I've lived in Texas. I've had so many interesting experiences. I've been in games for something like 23 years now, which is a shocking number when I think about it. I remember when I could, when I had been in games for a year or two, and I thought, this will be fun until it ends, and then I'll go find something else to do. That was my predominant attitude. And then you look up after 20 years, and you're like, wow, I'm really actually doing this. It's lasting. And at first, you're just struggling to figure it out, and then later, you're trying to express yourself through it. And so, but none of that was possible back at this point, and it was the world of magic for me opened up with imagination and books and fantasy literature, movies, comic books, things like that, music. All of that was so important. I think those things are important to everybody, but when your world is very narrow, or it is very not colorful, in the ways of like you look around and you say, well, look at all these possibilities I have. I think those things are more important. And of course, my world was better than the world of many people, right? So, oh, here's without a shirt, yay! And so I had it not the worst, and yet, looking at the work my dad did, welding in a chemical plant, and coming home and having trouble breathing at night because when you weld certain metals, they put off gases, and the company's constantly fighting to reduce the safety standards, and it gives you a good view into what's going on politically today, why certain things are important. We have people that break unions in the United States and talk about how lazy unions are driving up the cost of doing business in your country and how they're not competitive with other places, and therefore we ought to break the unions and lower the standards and put more mercury in the water and take away the gas masks from the people that are welding and all. And it probably is very abstract to many people, but if you grew up seeing that sort of thing, then you understand the importance of it, I think. But anyway, it was a very different life, and I now, for many years, I just feel incredibly lucky because I'm constantly around passionate people who care about art, and they're specialists in some area, technology or music or media, and it's a pretty lucky place to be.
A priori, à l'époque, tu te fais un groupe
At the time, you had a group of friends,
auquel vous jouez aux jeux de
and
rôle,
you played
vidéo,
role-play
comics, tout ça.
games,
Quand on est
comics,
extrait d'un
video
jeu,
games.
tu vas me dire
Here's
ça
a
dit quelque chose.
game.
Oh yeah.
Alors, Defender.
Yeah, an amazing game. Like when we were children, that we had you could be, your family maybe didn't have enough money to have a computer or a game system, or nobody had a computer initially, but somehow still you could find quarters in the couch or from your mom, or taking your lunch money instead of eating and putting it in. There are all these brilliant games from the time period, Robotron, Pac-Man, Defender certainly, and Defender is deeper than a lot of games. When you look at the layers of not only trying to stay alive, and the mechanics of all the enemies are very clear. They're very differentiated, right? When you see this enemy, I can't remember what the little square is called, but you know what it's going to do. When you see the lander grab a human off the planet's surface and get to the top of the atmosphere, you know it becomes a mutant, and the behavior, the movement pattern is different. The strategies you need to face it are different. It's very clear, very good training, I think. And The guy on the left, by the way, is Billy Kane, who's a producer in video games. And in the center is Steve Powers, who worked on Deus Ex and Dishonored. And I'm on the far right. And Billy Kane I was more into the role-playing games, but Billy was more into the arcade games. And the game Defender, in Texas, they had a championship where at all of the convenience stores, like the equivalent of a tobacco called 7-Eleven, I guess, they had kids would come and play, and if you won, you go to the district level, the region level, then the state level. And at the whole state level, the entire state of Texas, he beat everybody. And so to this day, he does like occasionally charity events where he tries to play for 24 hours, or if you play Defender long enough, you can roll the score over, because the programmer, I guess, only had so many number slots, and it eventually rolls over, and the number of extra lives you can save up will roll back over to 1. And so one of the dangers at the time that Billy had to watch out for was building up so many extra lives that he would roll back over to 1, and if he died at that point, the game was over. So like crazy little details like that. But those early games are really good training for seeing the differentiation. And if you play modern games, like indie games especially, like Hoplite was one of my favorite games from a couple of years ago. Very clear-cut rogue game with just fantastic depth. And it reminds me in a way of some of those early games.
Et en quoi le jeu de rôle?
So role-playing, I mean, how did role-play build you in a way?
I guess I was 10 or something the first time I heard people talking about this game, and it sounded crazy. It's such a common thing now, the thought of something like this. We have people doing elaborate parties of cosplay where they're role-playing according to rules and social conventions. But at the time, it just sounded like a revolution. For our generation, Generation X, it was like if you're 10 years old and D&D had just come out a few years before, and some older friends were talking about it, and someone describes a setting and some problems, and it can either be very shallow and tactical, or it can be super deep and cultural. It can be action-oriented, or it can be like political intrigue, and you describe, you think about the protagonist that you want to represent, and you collaborate as a group. Like, that is common now. That's nothing. You think of that, and it just flies through your mind. At the time, it was like, it broke your mind open the first time you heard it. And so I became obsessed with that, and we just played constantly, especially with the guy in the center, Steve, who's still a very good friend. And I still work with him. He's at Arcane's Austin studio. It was pivotal because I guess in some ways it not only is a diversion and not only is escapist entertainment, but at some fundamental level, it allows you to realize that there are other worlds besides the one you're in, and worlds that you can create. You can create your world. You shape your culture. You shape the environment you're in. You have an influence over it. And I think that's part of it's not just doing it and escaping reality. It's also the epiphany that worlds are created. We're creating how we treat each other and the way we interact. We're creating that culture every time we open our mouths, every time we interact.
Donc alors que tu baignes dans ce
So, I mean, you were sort of really in this
jeune majeur,
role-play and everything. So, and then, when you came of age, you went into the army. Why? You joined up.
I went into the military. By the way, that shirt is called Hypercolor. There was a company called Hypercolor that made shirts that change with body temperature.
Yeah.
It sounds like a great idea. It was the 80s. A lot of things like that came and went. But the reality is you'd wear it to work and it would change under the arms, or you sweated, or if you got a little fat from eating too much French food, there would be a band of yellow here. It was very funny. So there's a reason this picture is shifted to red tones. But yeah, the photo on the left is from basic training in the United States Air Force, which seemed like the least militaristic of the branches. And at the time, it was a way to escape your hometown, go to school for free, which unfortunately the United States doesn't really have the infrastructure for that. We have a privatized prison system, a privatized education system for after high school, privatized medicine, with all the perverse incentives that you would imagine those things having. But anyway, for me, this was an opportunity to travel, to see Europe. I lived in Germany for 3.5 years. I didn't live on a base or anything. I lived in a little a village that no one I've ever met in all my travels has ever heard of, called Quaidersbach, which is
Mais je connais très bien Quaidersberg.
which had maybe 2,000 people in it. It had very hilly with tractors and farmlands and a graveyard and a church and a cheese shop. And for me, a kid from Texas, it was mind-blowing. It was like, you know, I thought the food was great, the bread was great, the cheese was great. Of course, I had not moved to France yet. Now I know where the real cheese is, the real bread is here, you know. But anyway, so it was a window for me to do something different. I was in satellite communications, which was again a generally non-combat position. I worked with a bunch of fun guys, and we were part of the group that volunteered for the night shift, because if you were around during the day, your uniform had to be perfect and you had to salute people. But if you got to work at midnight, no officers were around, the generals were asleep, and you could throw darts all night, and you know. And so I guess I was in the Air Force for 6 years, and for most of that I worked night shift. And so I got very used to sleeping all day and getting up and going to work at night in these big compounds that were meant to survive a nuclear war on a NATO base called Ramstein. And yeah, that's what it was to me. It was a way to escape. It was a way to just leave everything behind and reset. And after that, there's a weird moment in the military, I don't know if any of you are veterans, but where you realize you're getting out. And you're like, okay, this is my last day. I stopped getting paid and everything. And someone comes to you and they have a form and they say, write down your address, where you want all your belongings taken, where you want everything delivered. And you're just like, I don't have an address, you know. And so I put down Austin, Texas, because the guy that I talked about earlier in the role-playing game, Steve, he was living there, and so was Billy. They had a band called Culture Shock. And Steve said, I'm working for this amazing video game company, and you'd be perfect. You should come think about working here. And I was like, oh, no, I don't know anything about that. I played a lot of video games, and I was a game designer on paper and in the role-playing sense. And I played around with little games that allowed you to tweak the environment. I think Paladin 2 or something like that. You know, I was around video games, computer games mostly. I had an Atari 1040 ST, I had an Amiga. I love those games because earlier than the other systems, those had sound and good graphics. But anyway, my friends were there. I had always loved Austin when I was a kid. When we would leave the Texas Gulf Coast with all the chemical plants and the petrochemical and all that, we would go up to Austin. It seemed like paradise. We were always going there to camp and to canoe. So camping in nature and being on lakes and swimming, and we would do a survival camp there where we would go for 4 days with no food and just a knife and some matches and a poncho, and that was so much fun. So much crazy stuff happened when we were kids. But as a result, my mind saw Austin as this place that was free from all the pollution and the negative culture of people who have to go into chemical plants every day and work. I didn't think it was a very good culture. Austin's a state capital. Even though it's a smaller city, it's the state capital. The University of Texas is there. University of St. Edwards is there. It's got a high percentage of college kids, which means new ideas, people who like to have fun. Anyway, so this guy comes with a form, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go there, and that's what led me to move to Austin.
Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'a priori,
What's interesting is that your friends, you meet up with them again, they're working in video games, but you don't sort of say, hey, I can do this.
Enfin, tu pouvais pas.
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon for, I'm sure a lot of people will understand this intuitively. Some won't. But if you grow up and let's say your dad is a film producer and your mom is a lawyer or something like that, or I have friends whose dad was a well-known poet. and mom is an entrepreneur or something. You look at those examples, and not only do you realize, wow, these are amazing fields that are very vibrant, very creative, very rich and rewarding, but also you meet their friends, and oh, her friend is an architect, and his friend studies sharks at marine biology. And so you realize, like, wow, there are cool jobs out there. And when instead, my dad was for a long time a single father, and he hated work. He hated his boss. He hated the people he worked with. He's not alive anymore, so I can tell these stories. He would go out to the chemical plant and come back just holes burned in his clothes, of course, like the jeans and the shirt have literally burn marks in them because that day showers of sparks are on him. He's been welding these materials, this gas is coming off. When you weld galvanized metals, you cough phlegm at night, you know. Fuck, I don't want to do that. No way, you can't drag me into there. But the point here is you don't realize, even if you read comic books, even if you watch movies, even if you play role-playing games, even if you play video games, you don't realize somehow that somebody went to work in the morning and they sat down and they wrote some code. They learned a new language, they squeezed more memory out of the system, they put some pixels together to make a cinematic. Someone did that, that's their profession. And I think even as old as 26, I still didn't quite realize that there was a possibility that I could employ my passion and at some level vision. Everybody has vision, right? If you get the opportunity to make something, you have a vision because the way you would like to do it is different the way I would like to do it. Therefore, you have some kind of vision and you can sharpen that. You can strengthen it like a muscle. You use it over and over and you get better and better at it. You get better and better at saying, no, this is what I want to do and this specific thing is where I want to go and here's why. Or maybe you don't even know why. It doesn't matter. It's just your vision, right? But, you know, at some point I realized, like, oh, I can apply my taste. At some level, vision is just your taste that you've exercised like a muscle. I can apply my taste and my interest. I think it was David Bowie who said, in some very real way, I am my taste. My talent is just what I find tasteful, what I find appealing. And a light bulb went on, to use the cliche, where I realized, oh, people around me are doing this for a living, and I've known them for years, and I know that they're excited about the materials that I bring to the game, so they think I'm good at this, and I'm excited about the materials they bring to the game, and now people are buying what they do, and they're talking about it for years. Like this guy, Steve, just to keep using him as an example, he worked on Serpent Isle. He worked on Ultima 7, The Black Gate, I think that was his first game, and he worked on Serpent Isle. And people still come up to me, and I didn't work on those games, but when they hear about Origin, they mention, oh, I loved Black Gate. It was the first game where I really felt like I could interact with everything in the world, and I wasn't just trying to beat a video game. I could go to a farmer's field, take a pumpkin, go somewhere else and find some flour, go to an oven and bake a pie, and then eat the pie. You know, it's player pacing, right? Like some games are driven by the designer, the pacing, and they're very rigid and ruthless, and you follow exactly. And there are people who make brilliant careers doing that, and there are players who worship those games, and I have zero interest in them whatsoever. There are other people who make games where you just screw around and do things at your own pace and decide, you know, you've heard the stories, but you're standing, and you played the games, you're standing on a building watching the sun go down in a simulation, and somehow it feels powerful. And then you jump off the building and fall to the street or something. You know, it's like, why did you do that? Why is that interesting to you? I don't know. It's far more compelling to me than your unlock schedule, where I have to do this action, this action, this action to beat the boss, and then I get this power. It's not interesting to me. And so, anyway, long story short, the epiphany that people who had tastes like mine or similar to mine were employing them to share that with other people was very powerful to me. Oh, someone writes comic books, someone draws them, someone makes films, someone, now we're in the world of specialization where someone makes, in a rain scene, they make the leaves look wet in a computer-generated film. You know, like it's very specialized now. But if you grew up around all that and you knew from day one that you could do that, oh, I'm going to direct plays for a living, or I'm going to teach dancers to dance, or whatever. Great, that's good for you. But many people grow up without any awareness that that's a possibility for them. And sometimes when they're lucky, they have that realization for some reason, I could dedicate myself to this. I could spend the rest of my life, I could spend over 2 decades trying to share the things I love with other people. We joke every now and then at work about how when we were, I guess the first game I played, my neighbor got a Pong. And it's a black screen with, 2 white bars and the bloop, 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 bloop. That's it. And it was fascinating. We laid on the floor in the living room, and just like hours would go by, and we're playing Pong. And we joke all the time at work about, imagine the kid who's 9 or 10 or I don't know how old, and the first game he plays is Minecraft or Fallout 4. Like the very first game he ever plays is Fallout 4, where it's just like hundreds of hours of content. It's super amazing, deep. You can, I've looked over a couple of friends' shoulder and seen a little bit of Fallout 4. I can't wait to play it just like everybody else. But just instead to use Skyrim as an example, the game that team made before, you can get married in the game. You can own a house. You can just wander through a field and pick flowers. It's mind-blowing if Minecraft or one of those games was your very first game. That sets the bar very high, and from that point forward, comparing it to Pong is pretty amazing. Anyway, those epiphanies, those realizations about what you can do, and you just need to be able to say to yourself, you know what? I'm not going to tell people anymore, I want to be a programmer. I'm going to say, I am a programmer. I'm not going to say anymore, someday I'd like to be a writer. I'm a writer. You're not going to say like, I've been thinking about game design. I am a game designer. Because that's exactly what everyone who is good at it did also. It's a process they went through. And some people, that realization comes very quickly for them. And other people, it takes lightning striking. And other people never have it, unfortunately. So it's a good. I think it's a good thing that happened to me. I'm very lucky.
Donc une fois que tu as le déclic, tu vas commencer à traîner.
So once you've got the trigger,
Systems,
you go to Origin
et en fait,
Systems,
tu vas traîner avec eux pendant 6 mois.
and you stayed with them for 6 months.
Tu nous en parles un petit peu?
Can you talk about this?
I was at Origin for 3.5 years, I think. And I see what you mean. 6 months. Maybe the translation may be a little different. When I got to Origin, I could not get a job there, and I was trying to get a game designer job. I was trying to get. We didn't have level designer jobs yet, but that would have been the perfect thing for me at the time. Tried to get a writer job. I tried for 6 months. I didn't get the job. I hung out at the company so much. Like nowadays, if you tried this, the security at the company would take this guy away. He's some kind of stalker or something. But I hung out so much at the company. Like people would order crunch food, and the crunch food would come, and I would sit down and eat with them. And there was a softball team at the company where they went out and played American softball, and I played on the team. And Richard Garriott took a bunch of people skydiving one time. They jumped out of an airplane and parachuted down, and I was with them. And I had friends at the company that would invite me along to come. And when I finally got my job there, a woman named Kay Gilmore put an ad in the paper saying, wanted game tester, $7 an hour. And I applied and I interviewed with her, and she was like, wow, I got the sense that she thought I was exactly what she was looking for. And all I had to do was say, you know what, I'm not a writer yet in the games industry. I'm not a game designer yet. I'm an amateur of those things, and I'm passionate about them. But here is a job that gets me inside the door for a game tester, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it was like a bit of an ego thing, because I saw myself as I should be a game designer, I should be a writer. And it was the best move I ever could have made. That was a humbling moment, but it was one of the best moves I've ever made. I've made a couple of other humbling moves that I'll talk about later, but because as a tester you worked with the programmers, the artists, the game designers, the producers. I worked with the translators. I still know the names of the German and French translators that I worked with at Origin. You work with everybody at the company. Sometimes when an executive is worried about whether the game's fun or going to be late or whatever, they would come to me and say, what do you think? You know, because we played the games all the time. And so for a while I was a tester there. And when I finally got the job, when I finally told, you know, Kay called me and said, hey, we're going to hire you. I told a few friends we were playing softball. And I said, hey guys, guess what? I finally got hired. And the guys were like, I thought you worked here. You know, what do you mean you don't work here? You've been, you know, we played Shadowrun, the RPG that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. We played in the conference rooms at video game companies are a great place for role-playing because there's whiteboards on the wall. Everybody has a chair. You know, you can order pizza. The local restaurants, they all know the company because they bring crunch food all the time. They, you know, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I thought you worked here. But anyway, yeah, so that's then Origin was magical because if you were like me and you were from a small Gulf Coast town, and I guess there's obviously a French equivalent to the cities like this. I know in Lyon, just north of Lyon, there's a town that's nothing but chemical plants, right? Fessines or?
Quelqu'un de Lyon, de la région de Lyon, non?
Yeah. Anyway, maybe my Lyon geography is not what it should be. But anyway, for me it was like I had done that and I had gone, and there were magical moments, right? There was my role-playing game group, the scouts that I went camping with. Every other weekend we went camping and we got away from the city and we did crazy stuff in the woods. It was fantastic. And then I did the Air Force, which was also not very exciting, but at least I traveled. I got to live in Germany and things like that. But suddenly going to Origin was like, you know the scene in Harry Potter where like he's treated like shit by his step-parents and they go to this dirty old English train station, and then he comes out in wizard school and there's a bunch of other kids talking about their familiars and their wands and all of that, and suddenly it's like, wow, a whole new world. You know, that's the way Origin was. Like, you'd get there and every room in the building, like walking down the hall in the cafeteria, people are talking about Doctor Who or, you know, their role-playing game from the night before, or they're talking very deeply about a video game that you know and that you've never met anyone else who knows. Like, oh, you played Blood Witch 2? It's a first-person game that was a clone of Dungeon Master by FTL in the same vein as Eye of the Beholder. It was the step-at-a-time precursor to games like Underworld, Ultimate Underworld. And Legend of Grimrock is a recent indie game example that was an homage, a loving homage to those games. But Blood Witch was the weird British or Polish or German version. I don't know where it came from, but it had a very cool feel. And you know, you'd meet people talking about that, and they could tell you like, oh yeah, remember that puzzle on this level? And it was mind-blowing. It was so expanding. It really felt like coming home. And this is a picture of me and one of the marketing guys, Chris Plummer, back when I had a ponytail. Because when you get out of the military, the first thing you want to do is grow your hair, you know, everybody. And there are some of the pictures in here probably where I'm wearing cutoff shorts or something, and striped socks, you know, sexy striped socks.
Après, donc tu commences en tant que testeur, je crois, sur
Then you
commandeur
start
Ensuite,
as
tu
a
vas
tester
passer
micro
lead QA
and then lead
sur
QA on System
Quel
Shock.
souvenir gardes-tu
What are your
du
memories
System Shock?
for System Shock?
Yeah, so when I got there, my all-time favorite game in the world was Ultima Underworld, which at the time I thought was made by Origin. And it kind of was. Origin was the producer. But really, it was the brainchild of a group in Boston, which was, if you know the United States, it's very far from Austin. They sound the same, but they're not the same. And a group called Looking Glass Technologies had made Underworld my favorite game of all time. And I could talk all day and all night about why Underworld was different than other video games at the time. And part of it was that player pacing, player creativity, recombining the elements of the game, solving problems in clever ways. I think there's a puzzle in Underworld called the Puzzle of the Bullfrog or the Temple of the Bullfrog or something, where there's a room with an inverted ziggurat and some dials on the wall. And if you change the dials just right, you can cause the floor in the different pieces of the rings, the ziggurat, to raise up so that you eventually can cross the room. You start on one side, there's a ledge, and there's another ledge on the other side, and your goal is to get to the other side. And so you put the dials in exactly, very hard puzzle, you put the dials in exactly the right place, it makes the floor, and you walk across. And I hate puzzles like that. And so I got there, and I had a levitate spell, and I started thinking about ways that I could cross and get to the other side. I levitated, and then I tried going very, very slowly all the way across the room, and I was feeling so clever. And I got all the way to the other side, and the ledge over here was this, and over here, boink. Some designer had been like, well, we don't want him to just cast levitate and cross, so it's like an inch too high, and at the time you're just like, oh, I can't go, oh God, what am I gonna do? And so, but over here I said, well, you can jump in the game, so what if I jump, and at the apex of the jump I cast levitate? And so I jumped and cast, and then I went, and I was done, I solved the puzzle. And the fact that the team was willing to let me not engage with that content the way they wanted me to engage, but instead let me engage with it the way I wanted to, is something Doug Church, who for a long time was a friend and a mentor, and I don't see him very often now, but I love this guy. He had a huge influence over me as a game developer. He articulated as the abdication of authorship, right? Instead of insisting on authoring the game this specific way, you set up an environment where the player has tools. And that is, I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I was into. And so anyway, long story short, I got there, and I was in QA for a while, testing games, testing Wing Commander. They said, can you fly some Wing Commander missions? And I had pirated Wing 1, Wing 2, and all of the secret missions. So I said, I know those missions like the back of my hand, sir. Let me in the cockpit. And so we played on the 3DO, all those missions, and that's my first job. I didn't even have a computer. I had a clipboard and a 3DO, and I was flying these missions that I already knew. And that's the game where we had magical bugs like in each action sphere where the dogfights where you were allowed a certain number of ships, and one of the designers had exceeded the number of ships. And the game was about the Kilrathi developing cloaking technology. And so for a while, QA had been flying these missions where suddenly one of the ships would cloak, it would just vanish. And the only thing you could see is the afterburners. When the AI pilot would hit the afterburners, you could see the faint flicker of fire at the back. Otherwise, the ship is invisible because it's cloaked. And we would fly and fight. It was incredibly hard. And one day, one of the programmers from the 3DO Wing Commander team was in my cubicle, and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm flying against the cloaked ship. And he was like, well, the cloaking thing is just fiction. We don't actually have cloaked ships. And he realized that someone in the design department had exceeded the number of ships in that action sphere. So for those missions, they just couldn't draw the ship. Instead of crashing, they just decided not to draw the ship. And so the QA guys were flying against invisible ships, So that was like a magical moment for me, because it's like a bit like fiction and technology coming together around the player, and the player having his own interpretation of that. Anyway, at some point in that, I heard that there was a new game coming into test, and in fact, one guy had downloaded it, and he had a very early crude version of it. The demo from the team in Boston, this game called, I don't remember what it was called at the time. I don't think it initially was called System Shock. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong here. But I was like, that's made by the people who made Ultima Underworld? You don't understand. This is not a job for me. I don't really care about video games. All I really care about is that experience, that improvisational, player-paced, atmospheric, lose yourself to the world experience. And I went to my boss, Kay, and I said, I will do anything to get on that team. And I worked with those guys for 10 months, mostly through email and the bug database. But for the last portion of it, Doug Church and a programmer named James were working on the VR headsets, and they sat in my cubicle while they worked on that. And just Doug was there off and on in Warren's office all the time, Warren Spector, and we all got to just talk about games, which was very powerful, very liberating at the time. Many of you probably at this point know what I'm talking about. When you finally meet somebody else who's exactly in line with your tastes or close enough, and you can just passionately go off about what you loved about this game moment, it's a great thing. And so I learned just so much from working with those guys who have all gone on to do crazy cool things at other companies around the industry and indie games or commercial. but the 10 months that I worked with them on the floppy version and then the CD version was just realization after realization after realization. It was very much like a boot camp for video games, and I was so thankful that happened. Loving Underworld, and then getting that experience, and then going on to get to work on Deus Ex. That was like 3 pivotal moments that shaped the trajectory of my interest, my taste, you know.
Tu sais que dans les masterclass, on a
You
des
know, in
surprises.
the master classes,
Et
we
justement,
have
il y a quelqu'un
some
qui veut parler
surprises,
du System Shock.
and somebody
Et si tu poses une petite
wants to
question,
talk to you about System
côté
Shock
personne, c'est-
and wants to ask a question. You might recognize
Harvey,
the guy.
hey, it's Ken. So I have a question for you. When you were working on System Shock 1, when was it when you realized that something special was happening? And what made you realize that? And the second part is that the thing then you took to bring to your own work to do games like Dishonored and cool stuff like that in the future? Or did you sort of, was that a thing of its time? And did you leave it aside and move on to different things? And I ask this as a guy who's probably still learning a ton from that game, from System Shock 1. So just curious what you thought.
So there's Ken Levine, one of the people behind one of my favorite games of all time, BioShock, and also pivotal in games like Thief, I think, you know, just a enormously talented guy. I haven't had the opportunity to work around him too much, but I've been around him off and on. He's always been amazing. And I've learned from reading things, from playing his games and all that. So I always feel like the first thing I have to say when people talk about System Shock is I was not on the development team. I was a QA guy. I was lucky to be associated with those guys. And I was their biggest proselytizer inside Origin, side by side with Warren Spector, just constantly telling everybody from marketing to the execs, you need to put more into this game. This is a magical game. This is not just some third-party deal that you made for some action game. This is something special. And it's a very hard sell at the time because games are expensive to make even back then, or the scale is different. But I feel validated in that view that not only my view, it was the view of everybody who touched the game, and certainly the development team is all their lives have been changed by working on it. I mean, you know, like there are guys I still interact with on Twitter. I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think the programmer designer Sean Barrett wrote some of the inside System Shock is a cyberpunk dystopia. You're in a space station. It's all about being a hacker and having software, and you can load up your little in your firmware that's in your head, and you can load up little video games to play. And so people wrote video games inside the video game, you know, which if you know other media, like Shakespeare had plays inside plays, right? It's an old convention, but it's really brilliant that you could like be playing a video game and stop and find some new software and upgrade the version of the old video game that you had inside and play it inside the game. And so we had the programmers on the team like authoring things like that inside the video game, just totally brilliant. So I don't know, I mean, I came at System Shock from the perspective of a tester, trying to help the team find bugs and reproduce bugs, and also just selfishly playing it nonstop. I never got tired of playing it. There are only a couple of games in my whole career that I played over and over and over, and even after we signed the game off, I kept playing. And it always means something special to me when that is true. But anyway, to try to approximate some kind of answer, man, there were just so many things. Like, you know, you could you had these like hover roller skates as an upgrade to yourself, so I don't even know if they really helped. Like, in honesty, I don't think they helped you fight much or get away, but they were so much fun to use because they changed the banking dynamics. You could be sprinting down the hall and turn a corner, yeah, sure, but if you turn on your roller skates, your hover roller skates, you would bank further and slide a bit, and it just felt good, you know? It was a good lesson in, like, this is what Raphael Colantonio is really good at, by the way, the founder of Arcane, one of my closest friends, who was a co-creative director of Dishonored and is the co-creative director of Arcane, really, really good at taking a movement or combat or action system and tuning it and just playing with the numbers of it and going into slow-mo and watching frame by frame by frame as somebody moves near you, and then just like as you impact with them, like syncing the cameras for a second, taking a split second of camera control so it feels visceral. He's really, really good at that. And so, you know, once in a while, a game just feels good, like a hang gliding game or a jet ski game. Driving has always been popular. Space games have always been popular just because sometimes there's this math in your brain. If you get up and run across the room, you know what the world feels like as you're moving. You can do that very fast in a video game and without consequence, without falling and breaking your neck. And so those parts of your mind that are used to space and distance and speed and time, video games trick those, right? So that you can have that experience in a very compressed way or in a very extreme, exotic way. And so there'd be moments when I'm just like flying down this hallway and like banking with the hover roller skates on. There are drugs in the game too, by the way, so you could take these patches and you know, enhance your reflexes and things. So you're flying down the hall on hover roller skates on drugs, leaning and like shooting a ray gun at oncoming mutants and enemies. And there was a kind of ballet about it, right? Like you play other video games and it kind of tells you, the systems kind of tell you, here's how you have to play. You have to, you know, you have to move at this speed, and here's what it feels like to move through the world. And we didn't put a lot of work into how it feels. You know, it doesn't feel great. The team at Looking Glass put so much work into the way the games felt. Like, you know, I can't answer. There was not one moment that felt that changed my life about System Shock, because I was coming at it as a total sycophant to Underworld. And to me, it was like cyberpunk Underworld. You know, it was like the bigger, better version. But I think there were probably moments like, and this is so simple, but like you're walking down a hall and you see the face of Edward Diego, I think, one of the marketing guy for Tri-Optimum, the company that is behind the disaster that happened on Citadel Station. Wow, I remember so much about this game. And you're sick of looking at his face and reading his logs and realizing he fucked everything up. And so you just shoot the screen, and it breaks in a cloud of smoke, and now the hall is there's no life in it, right? Before there was this like animating image, and now it's just dead and dark. It's a broken television screen. Again, very cyberpunk. And I don't know, on many different levels, like not only the feel of the gameplay, but the immersion in the world and the depth of the fiction. There was a moment where I had been playing for like I said, 10 months, and there was some audio log about something that had happened to some character, and I found his head in a really bizarre place, above a door in a little niche or something. And I realized, like, wow, this matches to the story that's in the audio log, and it makes a kind of sense where there's a synergy between, it's not just Pac-Man where you're running through a maze eating dots. That's a brilliant game. It's a very focused video game. It's something more, and it's a very relevant topic because the world's about to experience this explosive, revolutionary thing with VR, I think, where it's no longer just a video game. Like a really good video game from 2 years ago was Hoplite. Like I said, you should play Hoplite. If you just want to see pure mechanics, good differentiation, good player powers, play Hoplite. You want to see just a really tight, well-put-together video game, play Hitman Go. Just like super clean rock, paper, scissors. But the games we're talking about, Dishonored, Deus Ex, the games that Looking Glass made, there's something else, and VR is something else. A couple of years ago, there was a big argument about whether games should be formal or informal, like chess and Go versus a Twine game that helps you experience something. Like Kara Ellison made the game Sacrilege, which I talked about at the time when it came out, about how much I loved it. And it's just a series of sometimes not, you're not interacting with them in the sense that you're changing the game state. You're interacting with them in that you're reacting to it the way you are a movie or a novel, which is clearly interactive at some level. And it's powerful in another way. It's not rock, paper, scissors. It's something altogether different. And so I guess the synergy of all of that was what was powerful about those games to me. seeing how the level design and the fiction and the art and the programming and the tuning of the mechanics all work together to make this synergy. Someone clearly had a lot of vision, and it was a few stakeholders. I guess it was the founders of Looking Glass and Doug Church and Dan Schmidt and Rob Fermier and Art Min and all the people in that team that worked on those games. At some cabal at the heart of the team, from my perspective, around Doug. And certainly Warren was their external producer, worked very closely with them, helped shepherd them, helped beat off the rough edges, helped them refine the vision. Deserves a lot of credit for helping bring to life Underworld, System Shock, Thief, some of my favorite games of all time. But anyway, it was the synergy of all these pieces, I guess, that were magical, and the ways in which, even at a meta level, the game was true to cyberpunk fiction before most people in society knew what cyberpunk fiction was. I wrote pieces uncredited. I wrote pieces of the clue book because I was so passionate I would do whatever to help the game team. And I wrote little snippets of quotes from the different characters in the world in their voice for the clue book, and helped get it straight. Like, it was like no job was too mundane around this game. I wanted to do everything I could to help it, even though I wasn't on the development team, even though I wasn't responsible for the design. And explaining to someone, this is not a zombie, this is a mutant, here's the difference. Here are the still nascent conventions of the cyberpunk subgenre. It's going to be important someday. It's going to be seen as important someday. And here's some guys that are so into it. They probably read Neuromancer in 1985 when it came out. And if you think about it, we were working on this game in 93, 94, something like that. Technically, cyberpunk was a decade old already. So there were conventions, the nature of the protagonist as a hacker, the use of drugs. The game existed in two places. It existed in the real space of Citadel Station and in the the void of cyberspace, the consensual VR hallucination that people use to manipulate data. I do remember one thing that was very powerful for me that I guess would be a more succinct answer to Ken's question. I had been playing the game for a while, and there was a powerful enemy. You only get to fight it a couple of times in the game because it only fit in a couple of the rooms, I think. The rooms were pretty small, and this was a battle between the designers and the artists, as the artists made it a certain size, and the designers were like, the rooms are this small, it won't fit. But there's a creature called the Cortex Reaver. And if you think about that's like a fancy way of saying brain thief, right? Cortex Reaver. And it was a spider-like mech with legs, green metal, and hanging from the center, it locked down around the head of the person, and it just let the body swing under because it didn't care about the body. One of the conventions of the cyberpunk genre is that the body is just meat. It's not something I agree with, but it's a convention of the genre. I want my mind to be free, my spirit. I want to just engage with data on a raw virtual level. I don't want to have to worry about feeding myself or sleeping or whatever. It's kind of undercurrent through the entire game, right? But anyway, Cortex Reaver would lock around the head of the person, convert them to a cyborg, and the body would just hang under until it tore off at the torso or whatever. So it was just this huge spider-like thing with a terrible human head inside of it with the body hanging under it, and it was like a tank. It would fight you, and it was terrible. And different people on the station had been co-opted by Shodan, the AI, for different roles, right? Like the security guards became combat cyborgs and things like that. So there's this moment I was playing the game, and nobody had told us this, right? Like development tried to keep all the information from QA to see what QA would figure out. And there was this moment where I realized sometimes I would fight a Cortex Reaver in the world, and then sometimes I would hack into cyberspace and be flying around in cyberspace, 6 degrees of freedom, shooting my data gun, whatever, and trying to steal data objects. And sometimes there was a hostile program fighting me, trying to kick me out of cyberspace called the Cortex Reaver. I was like, that's weird that they named something in the world. And then I realized, this thing is getting the programmers on the station, and it's it's converting them into this that exists in the real space and in virtual space at the same time. This monster has a physical presence and a virtual presence in the cyberspace. And it's because this poor guy with his head in the vice was a programmer on Citadel Station. And that is like such a deep, nerdy level of realization about fiction and game mechanics and the touchstones of the cyberpunk genre that it blew my mind. And that's probably like the moment where I was like, this is as brilliant as any artwork I've ever encountered and engaged with. I don't care if you think cyberpunk is for kids or is a power fantasy genre. I don't care. Like, from my perspective, it's brilliant. It has its own conventions. It has realizations. It makes a statement about society and how dystopic it feels and our relationship to technology and our relationship to mass numbers of people, our relationship to money. And it's just layered and deep, and only if you engage with it I would actually say, as a game player, you have to engage with it at a talented level. You couldn't just be a casual gamer and sit down and play that and appreciate it. Only then could you really appreciate how good that game was. And I feel like a lot of us who love that game as players have spent the last, how many years has it been since '94 or whatever? I mean, it's been a lot of years, but like a lot of years trying to do something that good. It's incredibly hard to do something that good. It was powerful.
Après, donc tu vas te mettre à bosser un peu sur Ultima 8.
You're going to work on Ultima 8. Then you're going to have responsibilities. You're going to have your own project, an aborted project called Technosaur. Maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't really work on Ultima 8. I came in after the fact, and I said, there was a funny story around this. I said I was an Ultima fan, and Ultima 8 was a troubled development. The team had a lot of trouble with the technology. And I said, man, as a player of Ultimas, I feel like there's a bunch of things wrong with this game. And I wrote up a list of like 100 things. And I mailed them to my boss, and I was very harsh in my criticism. And I guess she forwarded it to Richard Garriott. And so one day I was working, and Richard sat on my desk in QA, which whenever Richard would come through QA, we had these low cubicle walls, and everybody would like perk up, right? Because like, wow, Lord British is in QA. And he sat on my desk, and I looked over, and he's holding this printout of my 100 things that are wrong with Ultima 8 that I would change. And it was kind of, maybe I had chutzpah, maybe I was arrogant for saying that, I don't know. But it was like, I've read this, and I totally agree with most of these. How would you like to fix these? And it was like, wow, this is a crazy moment when the rules of the game, where you come in and you make $7 an hour and you're in QA and you don't talk to the boss of the company, the rules of the game don't exist. You can make your own rules. You can change the rules. Everything is very flexible in culture. And in fact, when you don't have to work through proper channels, that's when great stuff happens, in my opinion. And so I said, what do you mean? And he was like, well, there's a couple of designers and a programmer or two that we're going to put on, we didn't call it DLC at the time, but an add-in pack or something where we're going to put voices in Ultima 8 and fix some bugs. And, we think maybe you could take your list and work with them as an associate producer. It was a magical opportunity, perfect storm moment for me. And I said, yep, let me do it. And we worked for a few months, and we fixed like half the list. And the game came out as a CD, and it got re-reviewed. I don't know if everybody remembers Scorpia, the game reviewer of the time, the PC game reviewer of the time. And she reviewed it and gave it a higher score than she had before, and said it's not a perfect game, but it's a big improvement over the original release. It's clear that whoever worked on this cared about it, And so that was my one Ultima that I got to work on. It was a short-term thing of fixing some parts of Ultima 8. And then after that, I got the opportunity to either go to Looking Glass and work on Terra Nova, a game that I really love, or stay at Origin and pitch my own game, an RTS called Technosaur. And that was a very hard decision. I went up to Boston to interview with Looking Glass Technologies. I got to have lunch with people like Art Min, the brilliant programmer designer who was the lead of Terra Nova, very intimidating guy who had gone to MIT. And I met them, and we went to lunch, and we came back to some of these guys were musicians. Some of them had gone to MIT. Some of them lived together. They had made some of my favorite games of all time. I thought they were brilliant. And we come back from the parking lot down the hall in the building to where the Looking Glass offices were, and there's like a key code, and one of them is about to enter the code, and Art goes, "Wait." He stops the guy who's about to open the door, and it's my interview. I'm there for the weekend to interview with him. And he's like, "Harvey, open the door." And I was just like, 0451. I entered the code from the first door in Citadel Station, and it opened the door. And it was like, "Very good," and it was just this hilarious moment where under pressure, I passed this little test, and I felt very clever. 9 times out of 10, I probably would have done something dumb, but that moment, I got it right. Anyway, it was a hard decision because I really, really love Terra Nova. There's one mission in Terra Nova that I always tell people about. In Terra Nova, it's a wing commander-like mission structure where you're given a briefing and you go on a mission, and then the game, you win or lose based on how many missions you've won or lost at the end of the game. The outcome is good or bad based on how many missions you won or lost. And in it, I think you have 4 or 3 squad mates that are like guys in power armor, like Starship Troopers or Halo. And you tell them what to do. They're AIs. And but there's one mission where the level design was, I don't know who did this, but it was transcendent. It was fantastic. Where you are told you have to follow this long curving road with a convoy. And the convoy is very slow moving and very vulnerable, and you have to protect it. It has to get to the destination. Meanwhile, nearby across the map, there's a big bridge, and on the far other side of the bridge, these huge mechs are coming. They're like AT-AT walkers from Star Wars or something. And if they reach the bridge, they're going to start bombing, and the convoy will die. The convoy cannot survive. You have to do both of those things at the same time. You have to demo the bridge so that the mechs can't cross it and get into your territory, and you have to protect the convoy all along the path where it's going to be attacked several times by pirates. And you can play that mission over and over. And you can put all 3 of your AI squad mates on protecting the convoy, and you go demo the bridge, or you can do the opposite, or you can split the team up. You can try many different things. And it feels very simulation-y. If you run to the bridge and you look with your distance zoom vision, you see the mechs slowly coming, you have a certain amount of time. If you are listening to the radio chatter from your AI squad mates, you know when they're being attacked. And if you break off the bridge and run, you tell one guy, "Just blow the bridge." And you run. This AI tries to blow the bridge while you run across the territory, and if you make it in time, you reach where the convoy's at, and maybe you can jump into the battle and help them. You can do so many different sandboxy things before we really had this word sandboxy. It was a pivotal, powerful experience for me playing that mission. Later, as a level designer on Deus Ex, I would recall that experience and what I felt when I was playing it. There's a saying, I don't remember who said it, but in English, over time, people will forget what you said. They'll even forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And people usually use that to mean if you make somebody feel bad, they're going to remember it forever. But I think there's an inverse to that. If a game makes you feel this epiphany, this magical moment where you realize possibility is wider than you thought, and you're more of an agent than you thought, you can change things more than you thought, they'll never forget that. Everybody who plays games has some moment when they realized they could solve a problem in a way that they didn't think, or just the elements of the game came together that were very powerful. But anyway, I ended up saying no and staying in Warren's producer group at Origin, and because I had this pitch for Technosaur where one side was invaders from the future that had dinosaurs, because I was operating on the Terminator time travel philosophy where flesh can travel in time but machines can't. And so cybernetic dinosaurs, Terminator-style dinosaurs could travel. And so invaders from the wrecked, environmentally damaged future cloned dinosaurs, cybernetically augmented them, and traveled into our time. And the present was defended by an international coalition of tanks and helicopters and soldiers. But the main point about the game, there's 2 main points. One was, 3. I guess it was a stealth model. We had units that had binocular vision, where they could see, and units that had radial vision, where they were more aware around them. And just like in XCOM, which we were heavily influenced by, we didn't draw the enemy unless it was in one of your troops, unless it was in their view cone somehow. That was one thing. That was a stealth model, and we loved that. 2, there was a nature simulation. Day changed to night. Rain would start. Rain would put out fires. In rain, lasers worked half the distance because the rain diffracted the laser. That's bullshit science, but it was fun from a gameplay standpoint. And then lastly, all the units, whether you bought a tank or a helicopter or a velociraptor or a T-Rex or whatever, they were just blank chassis. And you had to decide how to outfit them. So you could take velociraptors and make them into fighting machines, extra armor, machine guns on collars around their necks. Or you could make them stealth-oriented. Their vision goes out twice as wide, and they can't be seen in rain or at night or something, right? You could model, and that was the pitch for the game, essentially. It's a beautiful top-down real-time strategy game based around some stealth awareness model, based around a natural simulation, which is still fascinating to me. If somebody's sneaking up on you and the crickets stop making noise or birds fly up, I love that. The sun coming up, I love that. Rain starts to fall, I love that. And then lastly, the units being blank chassis that you could outfit however you want. That was the third piece. And we took it for a while. I was an inexperienced developer, really. I shouldn't have had the position at that time. We burned through a bunch of money, and we made a cool prototype. But Origin was going through a bunch of changes. The company wasn't very profitable at the time, and the project got shut down with a bunch of other projects at the same time. But it changed my life. I never forgot it, and I never forgot the lessons I learned. I mean, there was a day I was on the whiteboard with one of the programmers, and we had this is ridiculous, this is embarrassing, but we had something like 90 dinosaur types in the game. And sometimes that would just be text fantasy, right? Like use the same Brontosaurus body for, a bunch of different similar dinosaur. And the programmer was like, look, he was a programmer designer. It was like, look, how many means something? And I was like, well, off the top of my head, like 6 means something. 1 can fly, 1 is heavily armored, 1, one's fast. And it was like, okay, that's how many we should have. And it was like an epiphany moment. It's game design 101, but somehow I was so fascinated with dinosaurs, I didn't see it. And so in our dialogue, our arguing, we came to a better conclusion. So it changed my life. I'm still friends with many of the people I worked with. I still carry some of those lessons. I would still like to make that game someday,
Qui sait. On va maintenant parler
so now we're going to talk about Deus Ex, but we're going to have a little trailer
C'est un mode qui a été
to
validé
get
par
into
Square Enix, c'est pas le jeu
to
original.
get a taste for it.
Disponible sur
And
Steam,
it's available on
et qui vient d'être
Steam,
validé,
and it's
qui
just
permet
been,
d'avoir un
you
petit
can
retour
have a little reboot for people who want to see it today. Anyway, a trailer from Deus Ex.
Deus Ex, donc ouais, quand même.
So Deus Ex, yeah, come on.
Donc tu rejoins Warren,
So,
et
you
tu
joined
deviens
Warren,
lead designer sur Deus Ex.
and you were lead
Quels sont,
designer on
tes
Deus Ex.
souvenirs rapidement?
What do you remember very briefly about this time?
Well, just before this, I left Origin because one night I was playing Diablo with Artman, the guy I talked before, and the game finished, everybody started logging out, and we were standing in the middle of the town, and the rain started falling, and our two characters were there, and we were text chatting. And he was like, how would you like a job? We're working on this company, Multitude, out in California. We're going to work on a game called Fireteam. And so I kind of did an interview in the town of Diablo with Art in this rainstorm with all our armor on and all that. It was great. And I said, yes, basically, let's do it. And I moved out. So I left Origin. I went to Multitude. When Fireteam hit beta, I was talking to Warren, and the game was so excited. I was pitching missions and email. And so I joined that team back in Austin, Texas. And the thing I remember so much about it is, like, in retrospect, I was a really immature person, and so were many of the people I worked with at the time. We've all grown so much since then, of course, but it was very volatile. We all had different views. Some faction on the team, I think Warren, Chris Norden, and Sheldon Picotti recently did a series of interviews with Eidos for the new Deus Ex. The fact that people are still modding Deus Ex and that the franchise is still going is humbling. You know, I mean, it's amazing. It's a testament to the people that love the game, I guess. But I remember how contentious it was. There was a faction of people that thought we were kind of making an Ultima in first person. There was a group of us that thought we were making Underworld with guns, with dystopic millennial fiction as a background. There were some people, like on the marketing team, that thought we were recreating the X-Files. You know, it was just like there was a group of people at every turn who thought something different. And Warren would bring us all together in these big clashes, and through the art of, he's very good at like negotiating those kind of hot creative conflicts and keeping people from blowing up and leaving. You know, like stay in it, stay in it, stay in it. And at the end, something better comes out, even if you feel like you've taken damage just by having the conversations. So we went round and round, and something great came out of it. And to this day, like Chris Norden and Warren Spector and the other people I worked with on that project, like I owe them a huge debt because they helped us make something fantastic, and a lot of people played a part in it, and it's still has reward. Just knowing you did something good, like at some point in your life, you can, no matter how bad your day is, you can look back and say, a lot of people love this thing, and I helped make it. You know, and that's for all of us. That's a very powerful thing.
Parlant Deus Ex, on a un invité surprise qui voudrait te poser une question sur ce jeu.
So a surprise guest.
Là.
Speak with me.
Qu'est-ce que c'est? Non. Non. Ah non, c'est après. Oui.
Oh no, it's
plus tard.
afterwards. Sorry, it's later on. Sorry.
Non,
My
non,
fault. No.
It won't be a surprise now.
Ah yes. C'est toi-même, tu vas développer certains niveaux du jeu.
So you
donc
develop
là,
some
tu
levels of the
mets
game.
vraiment les mains dans le cambouis.
And so you really sort of roll your sleeves up and
C'est
got
à
your
ce
hands
moment vraiment
dirty.
que tu te rends compte des
And this
possibilités.
is where you saw the possibility of gameplay and creating a level where players have got full freedom.
Yeah, I can't take sole credit for that. Of course, it was a team of people working toward that goal. Like, we wanted to both make missions and yet leave the player free, like a series of sandboxy missions. And along the way, we got feedback. I remember a discussion. We were having a hot argument about whether in the middle of a fight, if an enemy's health got below a certain level, they should run away. And I remember Doug Church advocating very strongly for that. And some of us were arguing that, like, our game is not a great shooter, and to make a great shooter, we need to focus more on animations and the rate of fire and, you know, the AI for the movement of the enemies and taking cover and all that. And Doug said something like, yeah, this is one of those moments where it doesn't make it a better shooter, but it makes it a more interesting game. And absolutely right. You know, we went with that decision at a certain point, like below 20% of their health or something. Enemies will drop their weapon, bark a line like, I'm out of here, and flee. And the best thing about it was it provoked a moral decision in the player. Like, this guy's not armed now, he's clearly not going to hurt me. Do I track him down and kill him just because he's a video game enemy and I'm collecting the dots or whatever? Or do I let him go? And because we had given the guards a layer of, like, what are you going to do when you get off work? I'm going to go, my wife and I are going to go watch a movie or whatever. You know, we had given the guards that kind of dialogue here and there in emails and such. It really got the player to thinking like, this. And then we also had people say, remember, hit these guys hard, they're terrorists. And then somebody else would go, those guys are freedom fighters. We were arming them a few years ago. They're not terrorists. They're only terrorists if they're on the other side. And so we try to engender as much of that as possible. And that's an example of a very small gameplay feature that was very easy to implement, and a small amount of tuning, getting the number right when they did it, and how often they did it, how often they failed morale and ran. That made the game instantly more interesting. So many people contributed to that process. And as we would do it, we'd build a level, and here's something crude I made. And the point is you can go any different way to get to this point, and there's 3 different ways you can resolve it. And then somebody else would attack it and say, yeah, but it could be better if critique, right? You can critique something you love. In fact, you have to critique things you love in order to make them better. And after that process, the thing was better. And it was a more pure version of what you originally intended. It was a more pure version of what we talked about by exposing it to that criticism.
Après Deus Ex, tu vas prendre du galon.
So after that, you were on Invisible War, you're project lead, you went up a grade in Invisible War.
Yeah.
Please speak with me. I can explain what has come to pass.
The wrong person to mug punk.
Shall we conduct business?
To be blunt, I want it dead.
Hi, I'm NG Resident. What would you like to talk about?
Lots of bouncers in here. Are they really necessary?
Every society has rules.
For now, there's nothing you can do for these students. It's too late.
That's what you think.
Après l'heure dans son jus. Tu viens donc Project Lead sur Invisible War. C'est un jeu qui va être compliqué, qui va être difficile pour toi.
Was it difficult to develop for you?
Yeah, when I look at Invisible War, I guess I talk to people every now and then who didn't play the original, who their first Deus Ex game was Invisible War, and generally they have a very positive experience. But people who played the original, the PC version, and then they went to the Xbox version, they often have a negative experience. And my biggest regret to this day is that directing the project, I made mistakes that led to the maps being much smaller, and that led to the level designers not being able to do their thing. You know, we had great level designers at Ion Storm who could really do magic. Many of the same people worked on the first game and the second game on the level design side. So the levels are a little too small to feel as free form. They feel more like rooms and hallways. But we were working, I had never made a console game before, and I was terrified of anyone else coming in from outside the team with console experience and being my boss, you know, because I wanted to protect this thing that we were working on, this Deus Ex experience. I knew what that was. And so the lack of experience with console games, making at the same time PC and console games, really hurt me at that point. And the game's levels and the level design and the flow of the game is not what I wanted it to be. At the same time, there were many things I really loved. A guy we work with on Dishonored, Monty Martinez, suggested that we add black market augmentations, so that you not only have the clean, modern, scientific, military technology, but you also had some like hacked Russian version of the technology, and it really made you feel different if you outfitted yourself with those instead of if you had the street version of the augmentations. There were many things about it that were great. Just looking at it, I really love the Antarctica mission, but that map thing. Part of our secret to our success is level design. At Dishonored, or at Arcane, working with Christophe Carrier and Joachim David and Damien Laurent, the lead architect. A big part of our secret to success is good level design and multi-pathway, and not only multi-pathway, but paths that map to power decisions that you have made. And so it's hard for me to look at Invisible War without thinking that one problem, I mean, all games have problems, right? But that one problem is a pretty big problem that held us back from doing the thing that we really could have done better with it. But also, it was a really turbulent time in my life. I was going through a divorce, and my life was blowing up in a major way. So it was 3 very painful years for me all the way around. That said, there are things I really love about it, you know. So.
Avant de finir donc la partie sur Deus Ex, on va voir ce fameux invité surprise.
We've got the
Qui était caché
surprise
là,
guest now,
entendu.
who was hiding.
Hey Harvey, Warren Spector here. Hope you're having a great time in France. Got a question for you. First, when was it that you kind of discovered that immersive simulations in that Looking Glass, Ion Storm, Origin sort of way was the way of the future for games? And when you looked at those games that inspired you, what was it that you looked at and you said, you know, I can do better? What was it that we weren't doing that you thought you could do better? And how have you acted on that as your career has unfolded? Looking forward to hearing your answers. Continue to have a great time. Continue doing great work. Hope to see you back in Austin sometime soon. Bye.
I worked with Warren for 9 years, and it was like a father figure in some ways. I learned so much. He had a film background, and he had worked at TSR on pen and paper role-playing games, and then he had worked at Origin as a producer of video games. And so his experience was very rich in terms of media and in terms of being a creative professional. And so just endless lessons from him in those areas.
Qu'est-ce que tu as gardé que tu voulais faire
What would
mieux
you like to do better, if you like?
To answer his question, I guess, very specifically, I already talked about it a lot when I talked about Underworld and System Shock. But to answer the latter part of his question very specifically, I'm frustrated as much as anybody who creates things for a living is frustrated, because there is the thing you end up with, and there is the thing you had in your mind beforehand, this very elusive thing. When I think about an immersive sim, and again, Rafael Colantonio is one of my closest friends, and we spend a lot of time talking about games together. For the first 5 years I was at Arcane, our desks were side by side, and we just talked all day together and traveled all the time together, and very close. But we both talk about how there is this elusive game in the back of our minds that is like the perfect version of the immersive sim, if you will, where everything in the world is driven by characters having their own agendas on their own schedules. They react naturally to things. You're allowed to go at your own pace. You're allowed to combine things in the way that you would realistically in the world, so that you can be clever and improvisational. There's a procedural component to it. There's a nature sim component to it. You know, sometimes you leave a building, and if it's too hot in the building and you step outside, it's going to be cold later and you're not going to like it, but when you first open the door and the cold wind hits you in the face, it feels really good. And there's just some of that like we can't do in games, but we can do similar things, you know. Hearing a night bird or watching the sun come up, as I've said. Swimming underwater and finding something interesting down there. There's always this elusive version of the game that I cannot get to, and nobody could ever get to, because it's a fool's errand, right? It's oversimulation. It's chasing the impossible dream. But you know, that is some sort of goal at some level, and I guess it's the pursuit of that
Ensuite, après l'expérience
So after
tu vas donc
DSX,
prendre la tête de ton propre studio.
you had your own studio.
C'est sur Blackside, un
Midway,
projet complexe, un peu
on
mal
Blackside. It's a
On va regarder un
complex
trailer
project. We're going to see a
rapidement.
quick trailer.
Down here. No spotlights. Move it. Roger that.
This is 47 Echo, approaching the drop point. Jesus Christ, what the is that? Coming right for us!
Welcome to Rachel, man. Down! Get down!
Blackside. Blackside, projet compliqué. En fait, toi, quand tu arrives chez Midway, tu commences à bosser sur un projet
You
personnel.
started working on a personal project.
D'après ce que j'avais entendu, c'était un hit,
And
une
apparently it
ambiance à la
was,
hit de Michael Mann.
a sort of Michael
Et
Mann
tu te
type
retrouves un peu parachuté sur
thing, and then you were
Blackside
sort
pour
of
essayer de sauver le
dropped
bébé.
into Blackside.
Yeah, the studio was trying to do. Those are old friends from Ion Storm and Greg Kostikian on the far left, the game designer, and Justin Hall on the far right. But at Midway later, yeah, the studio was trying to do two games. The one I was really excited about was kind of the immersive sim version of Michael Mann's Heat, working with a few people that I really loved and respected there. But the other project, the Area 51 shooter, got in trouble, so some of us moved over and worked on that with them. And, you know, it was a very positive experience sometimes, working with Susan O'Connor and Ricardo Bear. But the company was just struggling constantly, the parent company, and the game basically got shipped at alpha, so it was a very bad time for me. It was not creatively satisfying. It ended badly. I got fired for saying the wrong thing to the press. But, you know, it's interesting because it's like the idea was, the high concept was your military units in a suburb, in a small town. You're shooting up people's backyards where their swimming pools are, and you're shooting up the convenience store. You're shooting up the cars in a parking lot. And it was during the Bush years, right? And a lot of us were super against the way George Bush was running the country. And the very concept of a black site, which is a prison that exists outside of law, where you can be held indefinitely and techniques can be used against you that are not legal and not humane. This was the allegory. There's a line in the game that Ricardo and Susan and I worked out that's the guys are fighting and all these enemies are coming in and they're wearing black armor and they have modern weapons, and somebody says, where did they get these weapons? And somebody else says, I think we sold them these weapons, you know? So it's that was the idea. And then from a gameplay standpoint, the idea was it's a shooter, you have a gun in the right hand, and on the left hand you have a contextual squad command feature, so you can point at a door and click and they'll go blow the door, point at a car and they'll take cover around the car, that sort of thing. And further, they had morale. So if the game is really going your way, they get confident and they get better and the game gets a little easier. It's a positive feedback loop. If you start to lose, one of them drops, for instance, they don't die, they get incapacitated, then they panic and they get weaker and they help you less and you have to struggle more. So you personally have to put in more of your effort when things start to go south. You have to use more of your expendable resources like grenades. You have to counter the positive feedback loop by trying harder and by expending resources. And so that left-hand squad contextual command with the morale system, plus setting it as a counterpoint to the Bush years in modern suburbs and modern small town, I thought that was super interesting. And I still contend that if the team, a very talented team at Midway, had been given 6 more months to get out of alpha and polish the game and finish it, it would have been much better received than it was, because the high concept, at least to me, was interesting.
En 2008, tu recroises la route d'un dénommé Raphaël Colantonio, que tu avais rencontré, c'est assez fascinant, à l'époque d'Origin System, puisque Raphaël a commencé sa carrière sur System Shock, donc QA en France, chez Electronic Arts. Donc c'est vraiment un article de Polygon appelé The Mirror Man, The Miroir, par rapport au parcours de Harvey et de Raphaël. Tu recroises Raphaël, qui t'invite à le rejoindre chez Arkane. Il vient d'ouvrir Arkane à Austin pour travailler sur un nouveau projet qui s'appellera Dishonored. On va regarder un trailer de Dishonored et bien
and we'll see a project called Dishonored.
I mean, just looking at... Our mics are off.
Quelques applaudissements quand même, chef-d'œuvre. Comment vous est venue l'idée de départ de Dishonored?
Did you get the original idea for Dishonored?
I have to say first, just looking at that again, I am once again just floored by how talented the people at Arcane are, the artists and the level designers, the sound work on it, and the programmers who pull it all together and made it work. I mean, I think we're working with the best group of core tech programmers I've ever worked with. It's just amazing to look at it in retrospect and go, wow, that looks pretty good. The original idea, Raph and I started talking to ZeniMax and Bethesda about doing a project together because one particular guy there named Todd Vaughn really understands this kind of game super well. He's a big fan. He's a fanatic for this type of game as well. And originally there was a pitch, a ninja pitch, feudal Japan, supernatural powers, assassination. And Raph and I kicked it around between the two of us, and we were much more into something that was closer to Thief, medieval Europe. And so we began to translate that, and our team began working with us. And we ended up with this like feeling of an 18th century whaling city crumbling in the middle of a plague. And it's Dishonored, yeah.
comment justement s'est passée la création de l'univers de
what
Donval
happened
avec
with the creation of
donc
Donval?
c'est Victor Antonov
It's
qui est
Victor
donc directeur
Antonov
du design
who
et
was
Sébastien
in
Mitton,
charge of
directeur
design,
artistique.
Sébastien Mitton, who was
Il y a eu
artistic
beaucoup
director.
d'itérations avant
There's
d'arriver
a
à
lot of
Donval.
iterations before you got to that point.
Oh yeah. Even halfway through the project, we didn't quite fully understand what Dishonored was yet. For a while, it was London, 1666. It really took shape. Victor Antonov is a very talented visual design director for the project who added influence here and there. Sébastien Mitton is our art director and is our art director on Dishonored 2. And Sébastien has the ability to look at all of these different pieces. He works with Jean-Luc Monet, who is an assistant art director, and some brilliant concept artists. And just constantly like pouring over the pieces and adding layers of history and deep knowledge about architecture. Damien Laurent is our lead architect, and those guys really know what they're doing. And so working with our level designers and with the narrative part of the team and the gameplay part of the team, we just kept iterating on what we were doing. A lot of back and forth, a lot of being open to critique. I mean, I have to say the first pass at anything is not great generally. You write a novel, you let your friend read it, it's kind of junk. But then your friend gives you feedback, you revise it, it's a little better, and you just keep doing that, and it's the same thing.
Quand on voit, quand
When we
on t'a écouté
see
ce soir,
and we listen to
moi j'ai
you,
un peu l'impression
I
que
get
Dishonored,
the
c'est un peu
impression
le
Dishonored
résumé de tous tes
is the
apprentissages,
summary of
tout ce que tu as appris au delà de ta
everything you've
carrière.
learned
On a même l'impression
over the
qu'avec Raphaël,
course
c'est un
of
peu le
your
jeu de
career.
Raphaël, c'est vrai.
That Raphael, it's a bit your dream game. Is that true?
Oh yeah, Raph and I describe Dishonored as our dream project all the time. We couldn't believe people were coming to us and saying, hey, we want to give you money to make this game, and they were really investing in it. They really put a lot of effort behind the game. We had all the time we needed. We had powerful marketing behind it to communicate with players through little videos. Like, we did a video called The Study of Stealth, which was just showing players how our stealth model worked and how to play with it. And we're in the age of video online, right? So in the old days, we would have released this game, and it was very hard to play. It was very complicated, and some players would have loved it, and some players would have been, whoa, this is too much. But by being able to communicate with people beforehand through marketing and through interviews and through videos that we put online, we were able to bring more players into the experience and say, hey, maybe you haven't played this kind of game before, but this is a dream game for us, and we really think you'll find something in it no matter who you are, whether you're action, mobility, stealth, into the rich world, the art style. You know, you'll find something in this, and it just worked. It all came together, you know. So you never have total control over your creative projects. There are always like multiple people involved or multiple forces in your life at one moment. Maybe some tragedy has just happened to you or something great's happened to you, so it's distracting you. Maybe the public changes halfway through your project. There are many things you can't control. And once in a while, when it comes together and it works and people appreciate it, it's just the best thing, you know. So my experience with Deus Ex and our experience, Raph and I, with Dishonored, the whole team, we just feel so thankful for the way it worked out, you know.
Vous le savez, Dishonored, c'est un jeu qui sans cesse stimule l'intelligence, la créativité du joueur. Est-ce que vous-même, vous avez été surpris par les choses que vous inventé les
surprised by some of the things that the gamers
découvert les joueurs dans les
invented
playtests ou
the things they discovered in the playtest and all that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I work with a guy very closely called Dinga Bakaba, who is our lead designer, one of the primary producers on our project, very important, pivotal figure to Dishonored 2. He was also one of the game designers behind Dishonored 1. And I think during Dishonored 1, there was a moment at the Golden Cat bathhouse where he was wounded and running from the guards who were shooting at him, almost dead. He wanted to get from here 5 floors down to the street and get away from them. But to fall that far is to die. And if to stay is to die, because he was out of bullets and grenades. And so we saw him jump off the building, and there was a woman walking below, and as he's falling, he casts possession. And our possession is not just your mind going into someone else, it's bodily. You merge with them and look like them, so you can walk past other people, right, and they don't freak out. But as he's falling, he possessed her, and then like he's in this woman walking along and walks past the guards. And the rules for possession were, when you initiated it, if you were within range, it just worked. We didn't check whether you were falling. We didn't check your momentum. We didn't check any of that. He had discovered, or somebody in QA had discovered, and he had seen them, I don't know, that you could use possession to break your fall and not take damage from falling. And Rafa and I didn't know that. And we were like, what did you just do? That's amazing. We stopped the interview and we started talking to Dingo. What did you just do? And it was like, oh yeah, possession can be used in this way. And it's an emergent tactic just based on the rules. And we, of course, left it in the game because it's very, very cool that you can do that you can discover. Most games don't have that sense of discovery, right? The team makes 10 things and you play the game, and by the end you've unlocked them in order and you've got all 10. There are things in the game we don't know about, right? Because of the way the systems interact, and we still love that so much. And that's a good example of one.
Justement, tu parlais de ballet tout à l'heure. Moi, ce que j'aime avec Dishonored, c'est quand on regarde des vidéos.
When you look at Dishonored, when you look at it becomes a kind of choreography. You said I should show a video, which when you know this game, watch this excerpt.
So this is a YouTube player who plays a lot of the game, and he gets to the point where it's just like a ballet, you know, it's choreographed violence. I was not a big fan of the movie The Matrix, but I love the choreographed violence scenes, like when they get to the building and they go in the lobby. And this scene changed everyone's life, right, that was into action films. It was amazing. If you were a John Woo fan, you might have seen something a decade before like that, but whatever. It was brilliant for that. And that's an example of a non-interactive medium doing this amazing revolutionary scene in terms of making action or combat into kind of like a beautiful thing. This is an interactive version of it, where some people on YouTube upload videos where they're just like virtuoso level of play. There are things that he does in these videos, and there's a Scottish guy we know, an Italian guy, and a Brazilian guy who all upload these videos that the team, we get them and we send them around to the team. And there are things they do that we have to stop and go, how did he do that? Okay, to get through the door, he's exploiting a bug with blink, and he knows how to do it so perfectly that every time he can just go through doors. To fly through the air like that, he's got the jump upgrade. Maybe he has Dowd's blink modification. He's doing things like firing. In one of the videos, he fires a flaming bolt straight up into the air. You don't even know why. And then he goes and kills a bunch of people, and like 2 minutes later, the guy's coming at him, and the bolt falls and sets the guy on fire. He's exploiting things like the bloodthirsty power that, like, if you build up enough adrenaline, then you can fatality people with one touch. And so he's saving that for a moment when otherwise it would interrupt his flow, and then he executes that. And it's just like, whoa, I could never do this. Like the best guy on our team, probably Dinga is the best player on our team, because when we do demos together, we like to have Dinga practice beforehand. And he's got it to this poetry and motion level. But I have to say, even Dinga doesn't do it this well.
On va parler un peu de ta relation très particulière, unique avec Raphaël. Vous partagez le rôle de co-directeur. Comment vous partagez cette casquette?
How do you share your roles? How do you organize things on a daily basis?
Well, it changed.
You hate each other.
No, Raph and I are super close, and you know, he founded Arcane 16 years ago, I think, and he grew up in Lyon. So initially he tells stories about how Arcane was like 4 guys in an office, you know, and when they would go to GDC, they only had enough money for 1 hotel room, so they're all packed in 1 bed. There's some photos of like 3 of them in 1 hotel bed, and really funny. But then he just kept hiring better and better people and focusing on process, and he has a very good eye for not only level design, game design, tuning, but also business, you know, like strategy and building teams. By the way, all these photos are from before I moved to France, and I think I've gained like 15 kilograms in France on the food. So like I'm looking at them, I'm like, I need to go on a diet. I need to go back to the gym. But anyway, you know, he's an amazing guy. He's a musician, and he's been running Arcane for a long time. And so I joined Arcane 8 years ago, almost. So I've been at Arcane for almost half of the life of the company, which shocks me. Like I didn't realize. I used to think of myself as an Origin guy because that's where I started. And then I was at another company, Multitude, for 1.5 years, and then I was at Ion for 6 years. At Ion, I did Deus Ex 1 and Deus Ex 2, 6 years of my life, and I was like, well, okay, that's the predominant part of my career. I'll never be anywhere that long again because I'm a mercenary. I'll move from project to project, and the company will implode if things go badly, or I'll get bored and I'll move on. But the fact is, I've been at Arcane over 7 years now, almost 8 years in January, I guess. And I could see being there 8 years more. I love it. I love the people I work with. They're very talented. I love Raph. We laugh. If you took all of our communication and you made a pie chart, how much are they talking about game design? How much are they talking about team building? How much are they talking about bugs? How much are they talking about publisher relations? How much are they just laughing? It's a huge wedge of just laughing, and I think that's part of the secret is you have to really like the people you work with. I've worked off and on since the late 90s with this guy, Ricardo Bear, who worked on Deus Ex 1 and 2 and Dishonored 1. And I was thinking about him and talking to him at one point, and I realized the word creative chemistry had always seemed like a mystery to me. Oh, what do people mean when they say that? Some arcane thing that I don't understand, or some mysterious thing I don't understand. And I realized that it just means you like the person a lot, so you're willing to overlook certain things. If you blow up, you're willing to come back and fix things. And you've been around them a lot, so you know how they think. You know what their strengths are. Creative chemistry is nothing mysterious. It's, I like you, and I've been around you enough to understand you. And so Raph and I have that now. I have that with some of the guys from Deus Ex 1. I've mentioned, I now have that with some of the guys in Lyon who I totally trust and love. Very powerful, very talented guys. You know, we hired somebody new on Dishonored 2, Sashka Duval, who is a narrative designer, and I sit beside her, and I'm not working around Ricardo now. You know, I don't have that guy to draw from, but Sashka's there, and she's so sharp, and she's absorbed all of the lore of the game and added to it, and understands the complex rules of the Bark system, and works with the level designers and the concept artists and everybody. And I see more and more, like, I like Sashka a lot, and I know her very well now, and I like how she works and how she thinks. I know when she's going to add something strong to the game and when she needs me to jump in and help. And it's the formation of creative chemistry, you know.
Et justement, forcément, il y a quelqu'un qui voulait te faire un petit clin d'œil ce soir.
Salut Hervé, c'est pas facile de parler à une caméra. Tu te rends compte que ça fait à peu près 20 ans qu'on se connaît. On a commencé tous les deux c'était en combien? En 93 en fait. Tous les deux on faisait QA sur System Shock, donc on se connaissait pas. Quelques années plus tard on s'est rencontrés, je crois que c'était en 96, car je suis venu chez Origin en fait pour une visite, car je cherchais un job chez Origin, alors que j'étais en train à l'époque de travailler pour Electronic Arts. Et donc en fait, tous les deux on avait la même passion pour les mêmes jeux, vraiment très très similaires, puisque en 99 tu étais en train de travailler sur Deus Ex, moi de mon côté j'étais en train de travailler sur Arx, Fatalis, et ensuite finalement on se retrouve Donc quand je passe à Austin, pour monter en fait le studio Arcane à Austin. Et quelques années plus tard, on travaille ensemble. Et encore plus fou, quelques années plus tard, on inverse. Tu te retrouves en France et moi à Austin. Et on bosse ensemble. C'est quand même dingue, non? Tu aurais pensé à l'époque, quand on s'est rencontrés la première fois en 96, que tu serais en ce moment en France à cause de moi. C'est dingue, non?
What's really funny about that is that just before this event, I was texting with Raph. Even though when we're in Austin, we sit side by side, but when we're not, we text constantly. Like we have unlimited texting, and we're just constantly texting. Just before this event, we were texting a lot in the cab on the way over here, in the green room behind the stage. And he was kind of pretending he didn't know about this event. He was like, is this going to be televised? What is it? What are you doing? And I was like, man, I'm in Paris. You know about this. This is some sort of masterclass thing for students and video game enthusiasts. And it's going to be like an interview. And he was like, really? Well, what, you know, and I was like, it's on, you know, Jeux Vidéo, you know, is hosting it or something. And he was like, oh, okay, well, have fun, bon courage, you know. And I was like, well, I'm a little nervous. I hope I don't come across as, I've said all this before, or I hope I'm inspiring to people. I hope they find something useful out of it. And I didn't know that he obviously knew about it. That's very clever.
Ok, on va parler maintenant, bien entendu, de la suite de
Dishonored. Talk about Dishonored 2. Let's look at this very beautiful trailer.
L'histoire se répète. Une fois de plus, on t'a poignardé dans le dos. Tu avais un empire à tes pieds et tu as tout perdu. Sois honnête. Méritais-tu vraiment cet empire? Et surtout, jusqu'où irais-tu pour le reconquérir? Prends garde, il y a toujours un prix à payer. Tes décisions se répercuteront à travers les âges. Du sang sur le pavé, une odeur de corruption. Le spectacle s'annonce distrayant. Que feras-tu du pouvoir que je t'ai donné? Quelle marque laisseras-tu sur ce misérable monde?
Vous avancez masqué, mais je sais qui vous êtes, Emily Caldwin. Rien n'est accident, tout est en mouvement. Tout vous a mené jusqu'à cet instant précis. Réfléchissez bien. Si vous me tuez, vous deviendrez la meurtrière que nous avions inventée. Ah! Vous ne vaudrez pas mieux que nous.
Le temps passe si lentement. Mais c'est toujours un plaisir de retrouver un visage familier.
All of us at Arcane are really, really excited about Dishonored 2 and the way it's shaping up and the potential of the game. And we know that people keep asking, when can we see the game? When can we see the game? And the answer is not yet. But we're very excited about that moment coming.
Vous avez mis du temps avant de vous décider à lancer Dishonored 2 ou c'était une évidence?
Want to do Dishonored 2, or was it an obvious thing?
For me, it was immediate and obvious. Like some people on the team wanted to go do something new after that. For me, I immediately began thinking about what would Emily Caldwell be like 15 years later. If you see the Dishonored 1 and 2 as bookends, the arc of the characters, like how would they go together? What would we improve? I immediately started working with Dinga Bakaba, Sébastien Metton, pretty quickly with Christophe Carré, our brilliant level design director. You know, when I see the work that Damien Laurent is doing on the architecture for the game and the lighting, it's just humbling. It's amazing. And so I'm so glad I made the decision to like jump back into this world. We want to do everything we did for Dishonored 1 better than we did, you know, like the missions are really interesting. We've shown some of the missions so far, like we haven't really talked about the missions yet, so I have to be careful here. We've shown one of the missions from the game, because in that video we always say, our goal is for you to be able to do everything you can see in the video. Just like Raph and I said for the first Dishonored, we told people, if you see it in this video, you can do it, and people were like, yeah, sure. We said, well, our goal is to get as close as possible to that. So our goal this time is to get as close as possible. So the moving house where Kirin Jindosh lives, the grand inventor for Sokonos, that is one of the missions from the game, and you control the configuration of the house, and you exploit that to move around in the house. So, you know, when I look at the levels, how complex they are and how interesting they are, every one of them is different. They're very themed, they're very high concept. The art direction on the project with Sébastien Metton and Jean-Luc Monet was already great, I thought. But for the new project, our tech director, Hugues Tardif, and his guys, they really wanted to bring a technology that allowed Sébastien Metton and his guys to make the art look as good as it could. And so we're trying, everything we did before, we're trying to make better. You can play as Emily, you can play as Corvo, they're voiced, because we figured out, by doing the DLC with Dowd, we figured out that it made the game more interesting to hear the voice of the character in a monologue before the mission and commenting as you go. And something that bears mentioning is that we wanted to do a better job with representation in the world, because I don't remember who it was, but I read a prominent Black American writer talking about the experience of growing up and reading comic books and identifying with Peter Parker because of some aspect of Parker's personality, but then seeing his own son grow up and respond to Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man, because he's obviously a person of color, and how powerful this was, that his kid could see someone in the comic book being the hero that was like him in some way. Very powerful, very liberating, opens the mind. And so we did many things well in Dishonored 1, I think, but we would like to have a more representational world. So I'm going to get the show wrong, but there's a woman who was the showrunner or writer for Grey's Anatomy or something, and she made it a point to cast a very diverse cast, women, people of color, in all the lead roles of one of her shows, I think Grey's Anatomy. And they call it, her name is Shonda, I think, but it's the Shonda effect. And as soon as you do it, it reflects the real world more realistically anyway. The world becomes a little more richer, a little more vibrant. If you have, you know, a mixture of people, right? Like different sexualities, different backgrounds, making up the world. And it not only makes the world more rich and more diverse, but it also enables a kind of representational effect where, like, I can look into your media world that you're creating and I can find myself. And because I can find myself, first of all, I exist And that's very powerful for some people who are constantly told by society, you don't really exist. You're not in the TV shows, you're not in the movies, you're not in the comic books or whatever. No, you exist, look. But also, you can engage with the world and enter the world, and it is more resonant with you because, you know, Miles Morales, to some American black kid who wants to be Spider-Man, you know, or wants to read comics when he's 10 years old, this is a powerful thing that not every superhero is a white dude. And so anyway, it's a secondary point to what we're trying to do because we have big fish to fry, right? We have physics to get right and patrol routes to get right and like the art direction to get right and the sound environment to get right and the narrative. I mean, like all of these layers and layers and layers of the technology and the art and the expression of the team and the play experience of the player, the mobility, we have all of that to get right. But on top of that, like I said, we want to do everything bigger and better than we did last time. And so Dishonored 2 is a very ambitious project, and I'm very proud of the people in Lyon working on it and all of the muscle that they've brought to it and the sweat they've brought to it. They're so talented. And sometimes one guy on the team will be very dedicated to one aspect, and he kind of won't understand why this thing is valuable to me. But to his credit, he'll like get behind it anyway. Okay, that's important to Harvey, let's make it work. And I tried to do the same thing. Like, okay, I don't quite understand why this is so important to Christophe Carrier or to Sébastien Mitton, but I'm going to get behind it, and I'm going to listen to their viewpoint. And again, it's this large team of people like respecting each other and trying to make things better and critique. It's really powerful, and it feels, part of my experience here is seeing France from the perspective of an outsider, which has really been fascinating. I feel like I see the French people very clearly. And also now, because I'm once again for the second time living outside the United States, I feel like I see the United States very clearly, the strengths and the weaknesses of both places. And I have to say, there's so much to love about France and about the French mentality. I find it very humanitarian at some level that I didn't realize that I was missing. But also the embracing of art and the embracing of the synergistic effort to focus that around a single vision is very French. It's something that the French people I've worked with are very good at. Now, of course, our company is international. We have a Russian guy, we have some guys from the Netherlands, we have a British guy, we have some Americans. So but it's predominantly French, of course. And so it's been a really interesting experience working on Dishonored 2.
Okay. Avant de passer aux questions du public, on a une dernière personne.
Before we go on to the questions, one last person wants to tell you something I think is pretty cool.
Je vous montre une photo avant pour que vous compreniez.
We'll show
Sébastien
you
Mitton, directeur.
a photo first. Sébastien Mitton, art director.
Salut Harvey, j'ai une petite question pour toi. On se demande tous au bureau comment tu fais pour rester aussi jeune. Parce que franchement, tu les fais pas tes 62 ans. Donc c'est quoi ton petit secret pour rester frais et pimpant?
La prostate.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Non, ça marche pas.
Alors, qu'est-ce que tu penses déjà de son imitation? Ouais, quand même.
Yeah. Man, you know, it's very common for people who are super talented to be hard to work with. Because after a while they realize, hey, I'm really talented and everybody wants to work with me. Therefore, I can get away with whatever I want. I can be a monster. And it's very rare for somebody that talented to be so humble and fun to work with. Cares about everybody, generally tolerates whenever somebody has different input. Like, hey, I want you to change that little thing that you love over there, please. Okay, I'll change it. You know, it's just a really, really sweet, warm guy, and the company really depends on him. The art team at Lyon is huge, and it all revolves around that guy, you know. So.
Mais quand même, la réponse, c'est quoi ton secret?
But the answer is, what's your secret? How do you stay so young?
Ah, how do you stay young? Well, you know, that's funny. I don't. The truth is, in December I turned 49, and so that sounds like an impossible number, you know. And I think the secret is stay out of the sun and have good hair. Those are two of the secrets.
Ok, on va passer maintenant aux questions avec le public.
Okay, let's go for the questions now from the
Oh,
audience.
regarde, on nous amène des fauteuils. Tac.
We move?
Yes.
Okay. Will I need the translation device?
Yeah, keep it.
Oh, shit. Okay. I have to say, the little videos that you guys prepared, over the top. I did not expect that. That was fantastic.
Ok, alors, donc j'imagine que vous avez des questions pour Harvey.
So I'm sure you've got some questions for Harvey. Let's go.
Alors, on est où? N'hésitez pas à vous lever pour qu'on vous voit.
If you want to stand up so we can see you.
Là.
Hi, thank you to be here and to talk about your life. My question is, when will you think it's the perfect time for you to start a VR game? What will be the event you will say, okay, now VR games are a good way to make games and I want to make a VR game?
Well,
thank you.
First of all, thank you for taking the English challenge. You did very well. You know, VR is something Raph and I talk about a lot because we're excited about it. Believe it or not, System Shock 1 supported 2 VR headsets. And like I said, Doug Church and James Fleming, I guess, worked on the VR support for the CyberMax and the VFX1 back in like 94 or something. And at the time, it wasn't like modern VR. It was very bad. But it was cool to see. And so for me personally, I would love to work on a VR game for a couple of reasons that are maybe non-intuitive, counterintuitive reasons. One is that I think it would strip away a lot of the accoutrement. Does that mean the same thing in French as it does in English? Yes, it's a French word, right? Accoutrement. It would strip away a lot of the accoutrement of AAA games, right? You would have to make the experience more focused. What is this game about? Is it a non-game like a walk in the park? Is it about flying? Is it about being a bird over a city and just watching the civilians on the citizens on their daily lives, their patrol route? Imagine the GTA City Sim, but you're just a bird. You need to collect the materials for a nest and look down on people. You know, VR is so new and is so powerful in a way that it feels like you could drop inventory and power upgrades and lots of things from game. That would be one reason that would be very powerful for me. But if you think about it, we've seen some people modding Dishonored 1 for VR, and it was very cool. Like walking around on the rooftop with we have these ceramic rooftop tiles in the British style, and as you walk on them, it makes the right sound. It sounds like loose pieces of ceramic, and you might fall. And you find a bird feather that's worth 2 gold coins on the top of the roof, and you're looking around the city. It's fantastic. But if you fall and tumble, or if you assassinate someone and we grab the camera and twist your head around, you vomit. You know, you feel sick. You're disturbed. And so there are things you just can't do. Going fast, rapid, disturbing camera changes that work fine in a PC game or a console game, they don't work so well in VR, so you have a lot of things to figure out. I know I'm not really answering the question about what would it take for me to go do that, but I guess I'm trying to say that it would be a very different type of game, probably, if I got the chance to do that. And my friends all say, when you talk about VR, you're a hypocrite, because I've privately heard you say you doubt VR. And the truth of the matter is, I have no doubts about the VR experience. I think the VR experience is a revolutionary storm that is coming to entertainment media, and I think it's going to consume video games and movies and many other things. Shopping on Amazon.com, I think it's going to move into social media. but it has the potential to do all that. How long is it going to take? I don't know. The thing I have a doubt about is the economics of it. I think if it's only video games, it's going to fail in the short term and have to come back later. I think if it's much wider than video games, if it's some of those other things, then I think it has a real shot at revolutionizing the world. Like, we're already at the point where if you're a poor kid growing up in a country with a bad economy, you can watch a Harvard lecture on whatever subject you want on the internet. We're one step away from you being able to be in the classroom virtually, or if you want to explore the Grand Canyon in a hang glider, or Gorge du Verdon, where I went 2 years ago, it was fantastic. You can, so we're right around the corner from it. But it has to be, video games are going to be fantastic. Movies could be recalibrated to be much more like, oh, I'm not just watching the movie's going on around me, and I have to decide where to look. And I have a different experience than the person sitting next to me because I was looking this direction and something interesting happened, and she was looking that direction. But if it's just video games, I don't think it's, in the short term, is going to have enough economic power to take off the way it should.
Hello. Okay, I try the English challenge. My question is maybe a little stupid, but I was wondering, when you have finished of lossing in your studio, what are you doing? I mean, as a co-director, what is a co-director? The top 3 of your main work you have to do.
What is my day made up? As my work day?
Yep.
Well, first of all, everybody who has a creative director role would have a different answer, right? You could have a creative director of a project who was a former programmer, and that guy would probably talk to every different department and try to bring everybody, communicate to everybody. No, this is where we're going. It's not a combo fighting game. It's this kind of game. The world that's not appropriate for that character. This is appropriate for that character. Thief, I hope I don't get this wrong, but when Looking Glass was looking for a project lead for Thief 2, I think they selected the former musician Greg LaPiccolo at the company. Before that he made music and technically hooked up audio and worked on the music because everybody thought he was the guy who could bring all the pieces together. So at some level, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you eventually get to the point where you think you're the one that can say, this is how our game is going to be different than all the other games. This is the distinct identity of our game. And that touches everything. The animations, that touches the lighting, it touches everything. And if you're lucky, you work with very talented people, and you don't have to tell them everything because they're leading you. They're saying, I get what you're saying, and here is the appropriate lighting. Or, I get what you're saying, and here's the appropriate animation. Great, then you're in good shape. But based on your background, that's going to dictate what you do on a daily basis, how you can most help the team. So my day is one part trying to communicate to people what we're doing and trying to lead us in the direction of a very specific identity for the Dishonored brand, which I have now worked on for 7 years straight, which is a lot of time to put your life into anything, right? So I know the Dishonored brand very well. So part of my day is that. Part of my day is evaluating level design, and when I get a chance, playing the game. Part of my day is evaluating the game systems, like how does it feel to use Emily's Far Reach. Now, I happen to work with a very talented team of level designers and a very talented team of game designers, so I don't have to do a lot there because Dinga Bakaba's there, right? Or Christophe Carrier's there. But you know, I'm very, very lucky. And I was going to say, and the last part of my job is because I'm a writer. I don't do level design anymore, unfortunately. I really loved it, but as a writer, I do a lot of the writing also. So my day is divided up between communicating the general vision, working with people in lots of different areas to validate things or give them ideas about how something could be more appropriate to our game, and then also writing and working on the narrative. But that's just my particular blend of who I am as a creative director.
Une question?
So, hi, my name is Olivia, and I'm currently a student in game art. And I was born in the US and grew up until I was 14 in San Francisco. But now I'm in France, and having lived in both countries and nearing the end of my studies, I'd like to know your experience having both worked in France and in the US, what exactly you think of the differences of how it works, what are the differences in the jobs, depending on the countries?
It's a great question, because it touches on the thing I was saying before, that I couldn't see the US clearly until I got away from the US and looked back at it and talked to Europeans who saw the US from the outside, or Canadians. And I'm living in France, but I'm not French, right? So I notice all the weird little things that are just normal to you guys, often very good things. But it would also be hard to talk about without generalizing, and I would probably get in trouble because I'm saying, well, French people are like this, or Americans are like that, and I'd get in trouble from both sides. There was a funny story, though, that I think is indicative of some of the problems of working in the United States and some of the problems working in France. Like when Raphael moved over from Lyon, he had been working with some of the same guys for years and years and years. And they would finally select someone to hire them, and the person was very happy to be brought into the team, takes their role in the team, and just keeps working, does good work and just keeps working. And Raph moved to the United States, and he found a talented guy to come work with him, and the guy started working with him. And then like 4 months later, the guy said, hey man, I'm leaving. And Raph was just like, what do you mean you're leaving? It was like, well, the guys across town are paying me more money, so I'm leaving. And he was just like, what are you talking about? I gave you a job. You're part of our company. And so it took him a while to wrap his head around it. Similarly, when I was in the United States and I started working with a French company, one day someone said, well, we're telling this person that we work with that we don't want to work with them anymore. They have to leave the company. I was like, oh, you're firing someone. Well, yes, but that's not the way we do it. We're going to talk to him, see what he thinks about it, ask him when he thinks he might want to leave. Maybe it's 2 or 3 months from now. And I was like, you're kidding me. Like, in the United States, we'd call him into a meeting. While he's there, the IT guy would go and turn off his password and deactivate the card that he uses to get inside the building. I'm not joking. And then when he finishes the meeting, they would escort him out to the parking lot. It's horrible. It's inhumane. It's shocking. Your whole life is turned upside down. And sometimes you don't even get the things back from your desk. It's amazing. The French way is better in this regard. So, I don't know. I'm just randomly drawing from anecdotes because I've had this experience now of working for almost 8 years with a French company. And I've learned so many things, and I've seen so many good things. But conversely, we also had a problem where, let me tell two more quick anecdotes. One, Raph comes over and he says into the Austin office, who wants to be the lead of this department? And he has like 10 people email him. And, the company's not that big in Austin, right? So it's like, all of you can't want to be the lead. You don't all think you're the best person for the job. Really, do you? But in France, sometimes, he complained in the past that there would be moments where he would say, we need a guy to step up and be the lead of this area. Who wants to do it? And no one speaks. And though I have to go interview everybody, I think you might be a good lead. Oh, no, it's okay. I'm happy doing my job. And we had meetings where Raph made this brilliant decision, I think, a few years ago. I don't know how long it was ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where he came into work one day and he said, guys, if we keep only speaking French, we can only work with French people. And that's cool, but it means we miss out on the German money for publishers. It means we miss out on the English. It means we miss out on publishers from the United States, which is a big market. And I don't remember exactly where the publisher for Arx Fatalis was, but I think it was Germany. Raph has this hilarious story where he goes to sign the deal with the guy, and the guy's very straightforward German guy, and he leads him down into his office, which is in a basement, and he has these, along the wall, it's very dark, and he has all of these metal cabinets. And he goes over and he says, now we signed the deal. And he opens one of the cabinets, and it's just full of identical bottles of champagne. And he takes one down and puts it on the desk and closes the cabinet and opens it. Now we drink champagne. And so that was I think that's the story of when he signed the deal for Arx Fatalis. But anyway, so he said, we're going to speak English. We're going to send emails in English. We're going to have meetings in English. We're going to give you English lessons so that those of you who are not as great, you get better. And that's where things really started taking off because, Raph was able to work with Valve. Arcane worked on BioShock 2. We eventually connected with Bethesda, and we made Dishonored, and it's an international group of people. And when that all started, there was this funny moment where the Austin office and the Lyon office would have video conference meetings, and Raph would announce something, guys, we signed the deal. And everybody just sits like this. And so it drives Raph nuts, because his background is Italian. So it's like he is French, but he's also Italian. And he's like, man, come on, we signed the deal. And so, there was almost like, this is an overstatement to make a joke, there was almost training in the class, or in the company to be like, when someone makes an announcement that's good, smile and clap. When you see an American, smile at them. And so it's ridiculous because the Americans are smiling way too often. Even if they're not in a good mood, they're smiling. And so it was like cultural training. It's a bit of a joke. It's a bit of an exaggeration. But there's all this cultural sensitivity that you have to work with people from different groups. And that's one thing I would advise is just think in terms of be international, work, switch gears a lot, work with a wide variety of people. It's good. Do we have time for one more question or no?
No, we have time.
Two more, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like to know what you think about open world game, because as you know, nowadays a lot of games are open world. If I take Metal Gear Solid 5, it's open world, and games like Dishonored are maybe rare this time. So what do you think about games all are open world and not just level design like Dishonored?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, we deliberately craft an environment, and it's very different than the other environment. And you could imagine Dishonored as an open world game, but to get from some place as different as the flooded district to a place like Lady Boyle's party, you would have to cross a lot of terrain, and we would have to either bore you because it's empty, or we'd have to fill it with content. And if we had to fill it with content, it's so much distance that we would have to make very generic content. And that would really rob the experience. So what we try to do is make a very interesting space like Lady Boyle's party or the flooded district that has its own rules and its own feeling, and cut the distance in between. Edit that out. Editorial decision so that that's gone. So that you only put your work for your team into that space and you make it as different from this one as possible. And then when you go through the world, it feels like someone lives there because it's not a massive amount of space that the team barely had time to stamp down. It's very handcrafted. Now that said, there are teams like the Fallout team who manage to do it, and it feels like both somehow. It feels open world, and it feels like handcrafted. It's an amazing group of people. And they have their secret sauce figured out, But so that's our answer is we like the handcrafted, mission-based. This place feels different from that, and we cut the part in the middle so the player doesn't have to fly through hoops or something generic to get there, right? The other comment I'll make is it does feel to me as a gamer like the open world games are getting too similar. Like without going into any specifics, because, hey, I respect anybody who finishes a big project. It's a lot of work. And I don't want to rain on their parade, but man, you play 10 open world games, and after a while, you're doing some of the same activities over and over. And so I do wish people making open worlds would find something else to do besides the same activities. One of my favorite games in the last few years, the AAA games at least, was Red Dead Redemption. And I think in part it's because I grew up in Texas, and so that's a mythos that feels right to me. But second, and I love spaghetti westerns. I'm a huge spaghetti western fan, and they really got that right. But also the activities, like keep these cows from going off the cliff. Those were just different activities that I didn't get to do in other open world games. One of my favorite open world games of all time is probably Mercenaries 1, because it was like densely packed with interactions. Because it takes place in a DMZ, it's not a city where things have to be normal. And I had all these experiences like driving my Jeep up the side of a mountain to where there's a camp where one of the main villains are marked by playing cards. It was one of the aces was up there. And I had a terrible fight up there where I was losing. But I managed to kill him with a grenade or a rocket or something. But then I was going to die. And I could not possibly get back down the mountain because all the enemies had started coming up and I was trapped on the mountain now. But I looked off. There's a bridge over here in a river. And there was an encampment of guys, a checkpoint. And a helicopter had been flying over. And these two were factional enemies. So without anything to do with me, just the rules of the open world playing out, the helicopter started fighting the checkpoint, and some jeeps showed up, and the helicopter got a little bit too close to the rock that I was on the mountain, and instead of fighting all these guys and trying to fight my way back down the mountain and survive, I just grabbed the helicopter, and I threw the guy out of the helicopter and took the helicopter and left. It was a density. It's like the elements of open world, but densely packed together so that gameplay was layered on top of each other and improvisational actions were possible all around you. So Mercenaries 1 and Red Dead Redemption are probably two of my favorite all-time open world games. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
On a une dernière question. Qui sera l'heureux élu?
Hello. Sorry. I want your vision about multiplayer mode in infiltration game. And did you try to implement it in Dishonored 2? Thanks.
No.
More multiplayer.
Dishonored 2 is entirely single player. It's aggressively single player. We talk to people all the time that are, they say, look, I love good multiplayer games. I love them. But I don't want you to waste your time making a multiplayer version of this game because what I really want to do is have a very good atmospheric, player-paced single-player experience, and those are rare. As this guy said, there are so many open-world games that have a multiplayer mode or whatever, and they're very similar after a time. We hear from a lot of people who don't want us to make a multiplayer version. That said, multiplayer is a lot of fun. I talked earlier about the elusive version of the game that's always getting away from you. You never quite get there. You never can make that game. And I'm not living this, but I'm saying it, right? So it's a bit hypocritical. But man, the multiplayer space is so often dominated by vehicles and guns. And there's nothing wrong with that. People are playing, what's it called, Rocket Arena right now, or Rocket League?
Rocket League.
Yeah, Rocket League is fantastic. But, and Left 4 Dead is one of my favorite multiplayer games. It's very good game design. The co-op is amazing. You know, I love those experiences, but it just feels like you could do so much more if you decided to model things other than vehicles and guns in a multiplayer environment. You know, look at people like Chris Hecker, who's working on Spy Party. And it's a two-player game. And one is mingling at a party, trying to do mission goals like put a bug in someone's drink or steal something out of their pocket or leave something under the table. And the other is watching through a window, deciding who to shoot, and only gets to shoot one person. It's a really clever take. It's a deviation from the standard, everybody run as fast as they can in the map and throw grenades at each other until one team wins. And so there's just so much you could do. And Spy Party, I hope, is you know, like a success because Chris has put a lot of work into it, and it's a very cool idea. But from our standpoint, we're still very happy making single-player games.
temps pour une autre question, non? Je sais pas. Ah, il y a un petit cadeau, c'est ça?
One more question. No, we have a little
Il y a
present
3 Dishonored.
There are 3 Dishonored, 3 packs of
la
Dishonored.
nouvelle version qui est sortie là cet été.
Advanced New Edition.
Et je crois que c'est Harvey qui va tirer au sort, c'est ça? Je sais pas.
Harvey's going to draw the winner.
Donc parmi vous, 3, vous gagnez une
3 of you
version.
are going to win a new version of Dishonored.
3 numbers.
3 numbers.
Alors ceux qui n'ont pas gardé leur numéro, vous avez l'air bien là maintenant.
So those of you who haven't kept your numbers, too bad for you.
422.
422.
Téléshopping. 422.
422.
Félicitations, tu as donc gagné, on va dire, la version PlayStation 4
So
de
the
Dishonored.
PlayStation 4 version of Dishonored.
Ah, one other. Roulement de tambour, c'est le moment.
Roll the drums, roll the drums. That's the best part of the masterclass.
C'est le 391.
391.
I don't even know how to say.
No, I can say
391.
391.
Pour la version PC.
Say
And the last one.
Last one.
391.
Ah, on en a déjà 2 gagnants.
So we've got 2
Wait, set, on.
Voilà, 871. Et
871.
voilà, demoiselle. Super, magnifique pour la version Xbox One, je crois. Génial, ok. Avant de libérer Harvey, qui va être crevé, moi je vais vous faire des petits remerciements comme d'habitude. Bien entendu, remercier les partenaires des Masterclass, Jeux Vidéo Magazine, la team Jeux Vidéo Magazine, c'est notre 11e Masterclass. Petit clin d'œil dédicace à Romain qui est en coulisses, qui est mon âme sœur pour préparer les Masterclass et tous les magnétos.
He's the one who prepares all the videos and all
Vous vous rendez
that.
pas compte, il y a plein de changements.
You don't realize, but there are a lot of
Il doit
changes at the last
improviser au
minute.
dernier
He's
moment,
got
donc
to
c'est
do
bien.
lots of
Félicitations
things.
pour lui, merci.
Big applause, big round of applause for him.
Bien entendu, nos partenaires, la
Of
Cité
course,
des
our
Sciences et de
partner,
l'Industrie,
Cité des
au
Sciences et de
top, comme
l'Industrie,
toujours pour nous accueillir. Je crois que ce soir on a fait fort, il y a vraiment
gives
beaucoup
us
de
the
monde, ça fait
venue.
plaisir à
Tonight
voir.
there's a lot
Bien
of
entendu,
people.
Orange,
Obviously,
depuis 3 ans
Orange,
maintenant,
who's been with us for
partenaire
3
avec
years,
nous,
our partner.
un super partenariat,
Great
où on a les
partnership.
mains libres, on est tous réunis par la même passion, de faire rencontrer des grands créateurs de jeux vidéo, donc c'est top. Et enfin, un petit clin d'œil aussi à l'équipe d'Arkane, comme vous l'avez vu, qui a grave joué le jeu ce soir, et notamment Romuald Capron, qui nous a vachement aidé pour créer cette masterclass et recevoir Harvey. Et bien entendu, on vous remercie d'être là ce soir. C'est hyper fort de voir autant de monde, de voir qu'il n'y a pas une place de libre. Et on est là, on continue. On a une. Ça faisait longtemps qu'on n'avait pas fait de masterclass.
We haven't done a masterclass for a while, but we're going to do more.
D'ailleurs,
And we're going to do quite a lot more soon. Can we do a little teaser here?
Il y a certaines personnes qu'on a vues ce
Some
soir
people that
avec
you
qui on
saw
bosse pour une masterclass.
tonight were
Un
working
barbu, il y en
with
avait
them.
2. Ah non, en tout cas,
There were
on
2
a
guys with a
discussion assez
beard.
avancée
So we're
avec,
moving forward
par exemple, Ken Levin.
with Ken
C'est
Levin.
compliqué pour des questions d'agenda, mais on la fera.
It's
On va y arriver.
complicated because you
Et
got
en
a
tout cas,
full
normalement,
agenda.
masterclass en
We'll do
décembre,
that. And in December,
avec un
before
Français,
that, with
un mec
a
assez remarquable. Donc
French
rendez-vous en
guy,
décembre.
pretty
Et
amazing
puis
guy
après,
in
normalement, il y a peut-être
December.
des chances qu'on fasse une
And
masterclass
maybe
en
we'll
janvier,
do
en
a
février et en mars.
masterclass
Donc
in January,
préparez-vous
February,
agenda.
and March.
Il y a du beau monde qui
So
arrive.
get your
Voilà.
calendars out. There's a lot of fantastic people.
Ça va être un peu de boulot par contre. Ça va être un peu de boulot, il va falloir qu'on dorme un petit peu. Mais voilà, donc grand merci. Merci à Harvey, qui a réussi à se libérer en plein développement du Dishonored. Merci à toi d'avoir partagé avec une vraie humilité toute ton expérience.
With your humility, all of your amazing experience, I'll let you have the last word.
If you want to say just one last thing.
Well, I'm just amazed that you guys come here and sit quietly for 3 hours. It's amazing. Thank you for giving me your time tonight. I know you could have gone to a movie or something, but it's good.
Okay, thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you. It was great.
What do you want to do? You want to just sign in a few autographs?
I can stay.
You stay and you I stay around and you tell me when you are tired, okay? Thank you very much.
Oh, it was great.
It was great. You like it?
Yeah. Hi, Harvey. Hey. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. It's possible to get to. Oh yeah. Tu arrives peut-être.
C'est bon, regarde.
Ah, quel professionnel. Je vais les ramener.